I'll be the first to admit that this all could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you should not be afraid of ghosts. Fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that time period, the cabin was not going to be rented out and would be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed to the cabin in my dad's car, which he left me in his will. Now this is our family cabin that my parents rented out when they weren't using it. I had the keys to the cabin, and also had the code for the alarms. So I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them on my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and played PlayStation and listened to music during the evenings. I also did some drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much shut in, aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room, a guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent in the living room, the kitchen, or the master bedroom. I had no reason to venture to the other rooms, and I always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name is Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed. I then played some video games and watched some movies. That day was forecasted for pretty heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car, and decided to stay in. This is where things begin to get a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were over a mile away. Surrounding us was a forest of very tall pine trees. This particular detail will be important later on. From the past couple of days, I knew that both of these cabins were empty. I think I've given enough background. Now I'm going to jump into the strangeness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked somewhat fresh, like someone had been here in the last 20 to 30 minutes. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me, and I may not have noticed. Perhaps they were shut-ins like me. Whatever. The footprints led away from the cabin and disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I didn't think much of it and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head off to bed. Midnight was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs and started to do his doggy dance, which was his way of telling me that he had to go pee. Shit. Well, fine. I couldn't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway so he could do his business. The only thing is, He didn't have to go. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me off somewhere. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees, where the footprints had been earlier. He also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up to the roof. After he figured out that he was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and just stared into the dark, which was a bit unusual for him. Perhaps there was an animal somewhere out there in the forest he wanted to chase down, but fuck that. I didn't want to chance anything. So I pulled him back inside, and we both went back upstairs. Around 30 minutes later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. I tried to rationalize that it could have been a pine cone falling from a tree, or maybe a harmless critter from the forest was running around up there. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart, at a length too wide to be a small animal, or even a man. You notice things like that when you're in an isolated setting like this. It was really getting under my skin. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and my shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out to the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my flashlight. Nothing was there, and the snow on top looked undisturbed. Must have all just been in my head, right? But what about Midnight hearing the noise as well? Maybe he was feeding off my fear and paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. I turned off the flashlight and allowed my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I was just staring at the forest next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a bit taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position between two branches. He looked very tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and was extremely thin. It was squatted on one branch, and its abnormally long, white arms were extended above its head, holding on to another branch above it. Its mouth was wide open, with no expression. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing or not, and I stood there just staring, motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and started pacing behind me, lightly barking at the same time. Still, the thing did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head told me that that was not a good idea. So I carefully backed up to inside the room, called Midnight back in, and shut the door. Once I locked up, I shined the light in the thing's direction, but nothing was there. I then closed the curtains and retreated back to bed. Later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was strumming on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but wouldn't go anywhere near it. The strangest part was I had the feeling like something was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice inside my head, telling me to stay where I was. I eventually passed out. When I woke up the next morning, it didn't take me long to pack everything up and get the hell out of there. In 1984, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Allenstown, New Hampshire. Our house sat at the end of a dirt road near Bear Brook State Park. In front of our house was an open field that had small tree patches here and there. After what I estimate to be about 50 yards, the field ended and the forest began. One day, my friend and I wanted to go exploring further than we had before. We were very familiar with the first acre or two of forest we usually roamed around in, and wanted to cover some new ground that day. Shortly after passing the usual landmarks, we came upon a dirt ridge. Beyond that, we saw a clearing with a row of 4 cabins. The area included a shallow pond, a dense wall of trees on either side, patches of bushes between the cabins, and a few cars that looked like they had been torched. The cabins had that typical lined wood look with flat rooftops. When we first discovered this place, we thought it was an abandoned resort or something. However, when we peered through the windows, most of the cabins contained furniture and beds. There was no one in sight. I remember feeling creeped out as we moved from cabin to cabin, and I would soon discover why. Behind one of the cabins was a dirt bed with half-buried animal bones scattered across it. If these remains were from hunting, surely they wouldn't want vultures buzzing around their resort. I thought it was odd, but not too alarming. My mom always told me to stay away from dead animals because they could be carrying some kind of disease, so we didn't feel the need to go poking around the pet cemetery, and soon left. Curiosity got the better of us, and we returned a week later. During our second visit, I noted how odd it was that there were no signs or markers indicating who owned this property, or if it was a private campsite. There were also no roads leading there. This time, it felt like we were being watched, though I didn't see anyone at first. As we prepared to leave, a tall man wearing a dark jacket emerged from the trees and ran toward us. He was about 100 meters away, with a rifle slung over his back. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he shouted. My friend and I started running away. The man followed us, unslinging his rifle and shouldering it as if he meant to fire at us. We climbed over the dirt ridge and ran without stopping until we got back to my house. We never told my parents or anyone else about the incident. We didn't want to be restricted on future explorations, but I don't remember ever going back there. What happened to us could be chalked up to a couple of kids trespassing on private property. But a year later, hunters found a 55-gallon metal drum in a wooded area close to where those cabins were. Inside were the bodies of a woman and a young girl. At the time, the victims were not identified, and the case remained unsolved. That was until 15 years later, when a second drum was discovered containing the bodies of 2 more girls, about 100 yards away from where the first one was found. One of the victims was only 11 months old. DNA testing later linked the victims to a serial killer named Terry Rasmussen. I never got a good look at the man who chased us away from the cabins that day, so I can't say for sure if it was him or not. But when I think back to that place, I think about how some people say that they never found all of Terry's victims, and I always remember those bones we saw scattered about. I honestly don't think 8-year-old me could tell the difference between animal and human bones. I heard a story on your channel about the 1977 Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, and it brought to the surface a story from my own family's history. These events happened before I was born. Had things played out differently, I wouldn't be here today. The year was 1981. The Ketty Resort was a sleepy getaway nestled in the mountains of Northern California. It was the kind of place folks went to fish, drink, and forget about their troubles for a while. My family was staying at Cabin 28. My grandmother Sue, her 5 children, and a couple of their friends. They were just enjoying their stay and doing the typical things you would do at a cabin in the woods. They were completely unaware that something evil was making its way through the trees toward the resort and to Cabin 28. No one knows exactly what took place on the night of April 11th, 1981, but it was theorized that someone, possibly more than one person, knocked on the cabin door between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Investigators believed that the individuals were known to my grandmother, and she allowed them to enter the cabin. Once inside, the assailants attacked. There was a struggle. Sue, my Uncle John, 15, and his friend Dana, 17, were bound with wire, then struck and stabbed multiple times with a hammer and knife. The following morning, around 8 a.m., one of the daughters returned from a sleepover at her friend's cabin and discovered the bodies in the living room. She screamed and ran to the neighbors for help. Once the police arrived, it was discovered that one of the children was missing. It was my Aunt Tina, who was only 12 at the time. Her remains would be found 3 years later. It's possible she witnessed what took place in the living room that night and was abducted and later murdered in cold blood. Due to a botched investigation, no arrests were ever made, and the murders remained unsolved to this day. Bear in mind that there is much more to this story, and many questions surrounding this case have never been answered. I've summarized things a bit because these are my family members we're talking about, and I can't bring myself to go into further detail about their horrifying deaths. I will tell you that the girl who discovered the bodies the morning after is my mother, Sheila Sharp. People that I've shared this story with have made comparisons to the Friday the 13th movies, and I can definitely see why. However, I think most horror movie fans view Jason Voorhees as cool or badass, but I don't share their enthusiasm. Jason Voorhees is a fictional character, but the influences that created him are very real. In my case, it's hard for me to separate fiction from reality. I can't watch those films and not think about how all those deaths would affect so many families, like they did mine.
I'm a father of 4, and man, do I have a story to tell you. My wife and I both own a logging company outside of Charlottesville, Virginia, and primarily make our income through there. The business didn't start off great, but over time it improved significantly. My kids are both in middle school and are the best things I could ever ask for. My daughter is the youngest, while my son was just a year older than her. Back in the summer of 2019, we had taken a family camping trip down to the Carolinas as the highlight of our summer vacation. We had PTO, the kids were on summer break, it worked out perfectly. We had gone out to this really popular family campground in North Carolina, which was the ideal spot for the family. I helped my kids build their tent while my wife built ours we'd be staying in. Now, this campground isn't just some small area of the woods with a few small buildings. This place was huge, and you were pretty much allowed to set up your camp however far out you wanted. After we all got situated, my wife tells us that we should all go down to the dining hall for some dinner and dessert. With there being some buildings like the dining hall and a visitor center, it wasn't a real camping trip, but it was still fun for the family. We ate what food staff was serving along with maybe 3 or 4 other families also camping here. After dinner, we walked about 20 minutes before we went back to our campsite to get some sleep as we had planned on going fishing in the morning. I made sure my kids were asleep in their tent by 9 while my wife and I just read our books in our tent until we got tired. After a bit, we sort of drifted off to sleep, and I'd say I slept for a good few hours or so. Now, let's fast forward to maybe a couple hours later. It was well into the night when I for some reason had this really weird dream/feeling. There's no real way to describe it without sounding morbid, but I was dreaming about my head being pinned with something sharp. Nobody in this dream was there but me, and the only thing I could really describe about it was the pain on my head. This went on for a good few minutes before I started to slowly wake up when I realized that the sharp pain persisted. I remember feeling around the top of my head only to find that it was also wet, along with a low noise coming from behind me. Right then, my wife wakes up and screams her lungs out, spitting out the words to go away. I turn around and there, standing right in front of the tent opening, is a red fox in its defensive position. It growls at us before my wife manages to scare it away with her shoe. Turns out, that pain I was feeling was a damn fox clamping at the back of my head. And the reason why my head felt wet was because of the blood running down. At this point, my kids were wide awake crying when they realized what was happening. Right then, I began to feel sudden dizziness before almost falling to the ground. My wife had called the front desk of the campground, and they had sent their medical team or whatever before rushing me to a hospital. After a couple of days, I did make it through and obviously recovered. Turns out though, we had set up our tents in a spot right next to a fox's nest that we didn't see. The fox probably mistakenly saw us as a threat to her and her cubs and did anything to protect them. It's been years now, and I am fully recovered. It's just crazy to think that my dream turned into a reality.
I should begin by saying this is a true story, and as of writing this happened 6 months ago in mid-November of 2017. I was working at Chick-fil-A in my hometown in New Mexico. It's only a small town, with 5,000 people at the most, but that's enough background. It all started when I was called in to cover the night shift for a new employee who had not shown up for work. This was the third shift in a row, and my manager called me. I didn't mind going in because money is money, and I knew the other fellow employees I'd been friends with for a while were working, so I thought the time would go by pretty quick. Beyond them, there were 3 other staff members working as well, but I didn't know them very well. They'd only started in the last few months. I hadn't really worked up the courage to interact with them just yet. I'll assign them names for this story: Alex, Luke, and Eric. My 2 friends are Lucy and Sam. To be clear, Alex was the manager. That night in particular, things were a little strange. We didn't see anywhere near as many customers as we usually did, but I didn't mind. Maybe the workload would be a bit lighter that way. Although the shift would be longer because of it. At around 11 o'clock, Luke and Alex walked out and went home, leaving Eric, Sam, Lucy, and myself to hold down the fort during the last hour of the night shift. Then, to our surprise, there was an influx of customers. In the span of 10 minutes, we'd served 20 customers, and it got a bit rushed. During the rush, Eric accidentally hurt himself, burning his hand on the grill. Lucy had to take him to the hospital, leaving me and Eric to finish serving the others, clean up, and close up at 12, when we were due to close. Apart from the influx of customers, everything went normally, except we were spread thin, and we had to stay behind an extra half hour to clean up after we had closed. Once we finished cleaning up, Eric left, and I closed things down for the night. I'd been working there for 2 years, so I guess Sam thought he could trust me to do it. Anyway, I locked the door and proceeded to walk to my car. But before I could even get to my car, I felt something hit me in the back of the head. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a lounge chair. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move at all. The only thing I could compare that to was sleep paralysis. At this point, I was beginning to panic. 1,000 things ran through my head. Who did this? Why? Why can't I move? You know, the basics when you wake up in that kind of situation. I started to try and yell for help, but all that came out was an unintelligible mumble. kind of like someone speaking when they just had a stroke. It was at that point I heard a voice. "Good, you woke up." My eyes darted to where the voice had come from. They were just outside of my range of vision, considering I couldn't even move my head or any muscle for that matter. By then, I was absolutely terrified. A million questions, a million thoughts rushed through my mind. Then, the person who had been talking walked out into the open. They were big. It was Eric, standing there with a surgical face mask. His eyes looked sinister, and he had a scalpel in his hand. I started to freak out. He proceeded to say, "Been wanting to do this for months." Without a second thought, he took the scalpel to my arm and started to slice, and it looked as if he had done it before. The pain was unbearable, but I couldn't move, just whimper. Then, thank God, sirens and lights. It was the police. Eric stood up with the knife, unsure of what was going on, and in seconds the police had kicked the door down. In a flash, with Eric unwilling to drop his scalpel, the police shot him. Not long after, the paramedics arrived. The police had managed to stop the bleeding and had realized he had drugged me, a substance to prevent me from running and possibly bleeding out too. Perhaps he wanted me to watch him remove the flesh from my own body. I would later find out the only reason I was alive was because Lucy and Sam had returned to the store and noticed my car was still there. They proceeded to watch the security footage to find out where I went, and they saw that I'd been struck in the head by Eric. They called the cops right away. I also found out I was not his first victim. The person whose shift I had been covering was the first. He had missed his shifts because Eric had apparently killed him. Creep in my living room. From Anonymous. About 5 years ago, I was living in a small rural town in an apartment building that really had no business being where it was. It was about 3 miles out of town, down a country road with not a lot of houses on it. That being said, it was always quiet, besides the occasional drunk neighbor. It was a normal day. I'd worked third shift, so I slept when I got off work, unless I didn't have work the following night. On August 7th, a day I'll remember forever, I got off work, came home, and decided to just take a short nap because I had to run some errands that day. I woke up and got dressed and went to get in my car when I was stopped by my neighbor, Tyler. Tyler asked me what I was doing the night before. He explained he had seen me outside my apartment, messing with one of my window screens. I assured him I was at work the night before, and it was probably just some drunk idiot. I went on about my day, did what I had to do, and got back home around 8 p.m. I went inside and put my groceries away, and I decided to watch some TV. Honestly, I can say I'd forgotten about the whole thing by then. Between 11 and midnight, I decided to go to bed. I turned my TV off and walked towards the stairs. I made it about halfway up when I heard a loud bang come from the living room where I just was. I stood still for about 30 seconds or so, and that's when I decided to keep going up the stairs. Not 5 seconds after that, I heard the sound of my living room window practically exploding. Now, I'm a big guy, 6'4" and 280 pounds. That being said, I have zero tolerance for someone coming into my home. In my mind, they would take one look at me and run away. That wasn't the case. I ran down the stairs to see what was going on, and sure enough, there was a man about halfway through my window. I froze simply because I'd heard stories 100 times like this, but now it was happening to me. He hit the floor, stood up, and we locked eyes. The only thing that came out of my mouth was, "Get the hell out of my house." He had other plans. We stood there for what felt like hours just staring at each other. He had this paralyzing smile on his face, That's when I noticed the knife in his hand. I said out loud, "You take one step towards me, I'll kill you." He stayed still and said back, "If you were at work tonight, this wouldn't have happened." Right then, I knew this man was going to kill me, or at least try. I turned, ran up the stairs, made it to my bedroom, and slammed the door. My door doesn't lock, unfortunately, but I decided I'd be safe in here with my Smith & Wesson .45 that stays on my nightstand beside me. I dialed 911, telling the dispatcher what was going on. I can still hear her response to this day. "If your bedroom door opens before officers get to your house, you're within your legal rights to protect yourself." So now in my mind, it's game time. I thought to myself, open that door. I dare you. You're done. I couldn't hear anything downstairs, so I sat there in silence. About 5 minutes went by and I hear the police arrive. I opened my window and yelled out. I didn't know if he was still downstairs or not. They told me to stay put until they got to me. I threw my keys out the window so they could enter. Then I heard my front door open, and the police yelled, "Drop the knife! Get on the ground!" I would say another 2 minutes went by, and an officer shouted that I was good to come out. I went downstairs as they were taking him to the car. The female officer told me that when they came in my front door, he was sitting in the living room on my couch, just not doing anything. That really freaked me out. What was he doing? Why was he in my house? I now live about 40 miles away and haven't had any problems since, but this event still gives me chills. I guess all I can say is to arm yourself. You never know what might happen. In the case of this guy, it seemed he knew when I worked and thought I was gone that day, but why he just waited downstairs with a knife, I guess I don't know. Maybe he wasn't coming to rob me. Maybe he wanted to break into my house, wait for me to get off work, and stab me. Mom's Ghost Story. From Anonymous. This is a story my mom told me and my siblings. My mom used to work in an office building as a janitor, along with several other employees. On this night, she agreed to work the late shift and cover for a friend. She usually worked in the mornings and was almost always done by midday. She was assigned the job of cleaning the top floor, after which she would work her way down until about halfway. Before my mom had taken that job, some of her coworkers, who had been there way before she had, told her that the 8th floor of the building was haunted by a ghost that was said to cry horribly at around 12 a.m., startled but not too fazed by it. My mom just thought it was her new coworkers trying to scare her. After all, she was new and had only been there for a couple of weeks. She'd also told me that each floor had a dial that controlled the lights, and you had to set it to a certain time, after which it would reset, and all the lights would turn off one by one. She usually took about an hour on each floor, after which she would continue on to the next. Once she had finished up on the 9th floor, she made her way down to the 8th floor. There, she set the timer for an hour and began to clean. About 55 minutes in, she told me that, all of a sudden, she heard one of the most horrific, spine-chilling screams she had ever heard in her life, coming from outside the hallways. It seemed to originate from one of the offices she was cleaning. Out of fear, she panicked, dropping all her things, and she ran for the elevator. From behind her, she could hear loud cries from a woman, something you would only imagine you'd hear in a horror film. As she desperately ran for the elevator, the lights she had set for an hour began to turn off one by one, leaving a trace of darkness behind. When she finally made it out, she made a phone call and quit the next day. I see dead people. From Anonymous. I live in a small town in Kentucky where nothing really happens. I'm a 22-year-old volunteer 911 operator, and I also have a sort of gift for seeing and hearing spirits. This happened around 4 years ago, and it's still going on today. I was working a late shift and decided to clock out a little early. I packed up my stuff and told my supervisor I was heading home. But then, one of the other volunteers came running in, telling us that a woman's car had been found abandoned, and the lady was nowhere in sight. The police went from place to place looking for this woman. Let's call her Krista. Krista had apparently been driving home on the BG, and the police say that her car must have broken down. Now, fast forward a year later, no one had seen or heard from Krista since that night she went missing. People in our town began to talk about how she must be dead, or maybe she ran away. The police did a full investigation and came up with nothing. Everyone suspected that her boyfriend Beau had something to do with her disappearance, but the police couldn't prove it. Now, all that happened about 4 or 5 years ago, and you're probably wondering what that has to do with me. Well, a few months back, I started to have these nightmares of a woman whose car broke down. She went to go look for help, but was abducted. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because at the time, I had no idea that Krista's car was broken down and that they believed she went to find help. I only knew that a woman's car was found on the side of the road. As time went on, the nightmares grew worse and worse. I kept having them, and each one had more and more details. The last one I had was of 2 men burying a body in the woods. I believe that Krista was murdered, and she's showing me where her killers buried her body. The Clown in the Elevator, from Alexis D. I now live in a big city after moving from a small town a few months ago. I attend college, and I'm working to get my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I live with my mother and 2-year-old son in an old apartment building we just moved into. I thought the apartment building looked safe, but what happened to me about a week ago has changed my mind. I work the graveyard shift, going to work at 5:30 p.m. and usually getting off at 4 a.m. It was a couple of nights after Halloween, and my mom was at the apartment watching my son. A friend from work sometimes gives me a ride home, and he had just dropped me off. Being a young female and it being dark out in a big city is why he usually walks me to the door. I tell him thanks, then I reach for my key because the entrance doors of my apartment building are usually locked after 10 p.m., and tenants are only allowed to get in after hours. As I unlocked the door, I noticed that the knob turned, and the door was already unlocked. Funny, I thought to myself. The entrance doors to this place are never open like that. As I walked in, I decided to take the elevator. I got inside and put my key into my purse. With my head down, putting my key back, I suddenly heard someone step into the elevator with me. I lifted my head, and I got startled big time. There stood a man in a full clown outfit. The outfit was blue with white stripes going up and down. He wore huge blue clown shoes, a blue curly clown wig, along with a red nose and blue and red makeup, forming a smile. However, he did not have an actual smile on his face. His expression was nothing but a deep, blank stare. The elevator doors closed, and I say good evening to him, being the nice person I was. Suddenly, his deep blank stare turns into a sinister look. At me. As the elevator starts going up, I think to myself, what in the world is he doing in this building at this hour? Was someone having a party? But birthday parties usually don't go until 5 a.m., especially if it's a kid's birthday party, where clowns would often be present. I also noticed he was carrying a bag, which I didn't notice when he first stepped into the elevator. As he looked at me with that sinister look, he bent down to get something from that bag right when the elevator stopped at the 6th floor, the floor where my apartment was. The elevator doors open up, and I start stepping out, saying, "Have a nice morning," to him. As I say this, he looks up, and the sinister look turns into an even more sinister smile. He grabs something out of his bag and stands up. What he grabbed turned out to be a huge kitchen knife. I scream then, running from the elevator down the hallway, and I kid you not, this clown man chases me with that knife. I ran as fast as I could, being chased, the man laughing like a lunatic. Finally, I make it to my room and quickly grabbed my keys, opening the door, just as he reached me with the knife. I slam the door in his face and go straight to the phone to call 911. After I call the cops, I look out the peephole in my door, and I don't see anyone out there. My mom wakes up, and I tell her what happened and why I called the cops. When they arrive, the sinister clown is nowhere to be found in the building. The cops don't think I'm lying, though, because in the building right next to ours, a man had been spotted with the same kind of clown suit. He fit my description. A few nights ago, in the same neighborhood I live in, there was a murder in one of the houses. A woman was strangled to death, and a witness even said a clown was spotted in the area. Luckily, the police promised to patrol the area, and they continued to check the apartment building. So, creepy clown, please don't come near me again. Lady in the White Shorts, from M. Kintz. I live in Northwest Florida, and I work at the airport. I've been there for 20 years, primarily working the graveyard shift as a toll booth cashier. During the night, I use a handheld computer to enter letters and numbers from license plates for lost ticket purposes. Sometimes my manager assigns me to go to the garage for inventory, and I always feel uneasy about the 4th level. One night, as I was inputting information into my handheld, I looked up and noticed a woman standing near the edge of the garage. She was wearing a short-sleeved baby blue shirt and white shorts. She didn't move or look back, and her shoulder-length black hair framed her face. I couldn't help but wonder why she was wearing shorts when it was around 42 degrees outside. Nevertheless, I shrugged it off, continuing to enter in more license plates. A few seconds later, when I glanced up again, she was gone. I didn't hear any footsteps, and the sliding door that led into the lobby by the elevator didn't make its usual squeaking sound. I immediately informed my managers and coworkers about what I'd seen, but they looked at me as if I was crazy. Since then, whenever I go to the 4th level, I make sure to check my surroundings more attentively.
This happened a few years back. I was 11 years old at the time, with my family driving in the middle of nowhere, Montana. It was also the middle of the night in the dead of winter. We used to own this place in the literal middle of nowhere, and every once in a while we'd drive out and spend a week fishing, camping, and hiking. So we were driving back towards civilization, and everyone was tired. Big walls of snow were on either side of the road. Beyond the dirty snowbanks, you could see thick tree lines. We were cruising along, climbing up over this mountain pass. I remember I had half my forehead pressed up against the cold glass while I tiredly watched what little snow and nature I could make out in the dark. Then I saw this person. I will always remember her as a female. Maybe that's just what I settled on in my head, but either way, they were wearing a tattered coat, multiple layers, and carrying a couple of big bags. I remember seeing a flash of a cold face. I wasn't the only one to see her though. My dad mumbled, "See that? Must be freezing out there." And my mom said something like, "Maybe we should give them a ride." But we were already a half-mile away. So we got to the top of this mountain. I could tell because I got that feeling in my ears, and we began the descent down to the other side. The driving conditions were not great, but the old family car was doing just fine. We leveled out a bit, and I started scanning the distance for any signs of a city, town, or anything. Still nothing but snow and trees out there. We were totally alone. We began the real descent, and we started winding down this mountain pass. I was staring out the window at the snow and trees as the drive got scary. We hadn't passed a car for what seemed like hours. I remember my dad started talking about something, and that's when I saw her again, standing out in the snow. I got a brief glimpse when they were illuminated by the headlights, but then gone. This time I got a better look at her face, and I wish I hadn't. A really strange smile in the middle of a very disfigured face. Maybe she was a horrible burn victim. In that brief second, I couldn't get the image out of my head, but it felt like she was staring right at me, smiling, some messed up kind of understanding in her small black eyes. So we drove on for a bit, and I remember just staring out the window. It immediately struck me. How did she get there? How did she travel miles and miles and miles in front of us? We didn't pass a car, truck, or anything, and there wasn't really any other road out there. We eventually got to the bottom of that mountain and made it to some roadside motel where we stayed for the night. The next morning, we found this little diner right outside the town that we stayed in. It was a classic trucker stop type of diner. We ate and played I Spy. After the bill was paid and we zipped up our coats, I heard the doors chime. We were all heading out when I looked up and saw her again. The same coat, the dozens of hooded sweaters, the big bags filled with what looked like damp clothing. I was walking out behind my dad, and I remember that she gave this look at me as she passed. She really looked like she hated me, like she knew things I didn't, looking at me with that huge disfigured smile. She stopped beside me, but I stayed behind my dad until we got in the car. I don't know what really was going on. I couldn't help but feel bad for her if she was truly lost out there walking for miles in the cold, or maybe someone had hurt her. Probably a dozen of explanations for the whole experience, but I can't shake the weird feeling like she was following us. My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to storms farther north, we traveled straight west instead of northwest at first and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska into South Dakota. Once we were far enough north, we turned west onto I-90. At that point, it had been over an hour since we saw anywhere that might have had a public restroom, and we were on state routes, so no rest areas. Those of you who have traveled with a young child know the bladder and boredom limit isn't very long, and our daughter was begging to stop somewhere to pee. South Dakota was similarly deserted, or even worse, as we headed west. Finally, we reached a desperately needed rest stop as my 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pulled in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in as well. I didn't think too much of it at first until I started to open my door. My head was turned to the right where the truck was parked just a couple of spots over. My eyes met with the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy, scraggly gray-brown beard, and dark eyes. I could see that he was wearing a dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband that I didn't want to go into the rest stop alone because of the guy and the weird feeling that I got from him. My husband thought that I was being a little silly, but agreed to come with us. At that point, the next stop was the town of Wall, South Dakota, about 100 miles away still, according to the huge billboards we'd passed advertising it. My husband figured he'd better empty his bladder, even though he didn't particularly feel the need. I grabbed our daughter and we headed inside, followed by the guy who had been rummaging in his truck and wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and headed back out into the lobby. As I expected, my husband was already out there, since he didn't have a small human to chaperone. The old guy was also in the tiny lobby area. He was just standing there staring at my husband. My husband rushed us back out to our car. As we were buckling in, he locked the doors. Then he told me that the guy hadn't even gone to the restroom and was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might have just had a close call, and he was glad that it hadn't just been me and our daughter to go in there. However, that's not the end of the story. That 100-mile drive to Wall was pretty easy with empty landscaping, but a decent number of turnoffs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought that the whole episode was behind us, except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some road snacks, plus look at this fun little tourist trap in the middle of nowhere. We saw the guy in the store not even 20 feet away from us. Same face, beard, and dirty plaid shirt. Thankfully, we'd already eaten, so since he was staring at us again, we quickly paid for our snacks and trinkets and got out of there. We didn't see him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming safely with no other sight of that man or his truck. It was about 2000 or 2001, and my best friend and I were 13 years old. We lived in a small town in rural Minnesota of about 2,000 people. Out of our friend group, her and I were the only two who lived out in the country, farther away from the small town out in the middle of nowhere. So we understood the boredom that could ensue, but the fun things that would come out of it. Exploring the woods, running around in the cornfields, creating forts, exploring the abandoned house on their property. It was a really fun time for us. One day, we decided to take our bikes and ride down some gravel roads. Her little brother tagged along, and he was probably about 9 or 10 at the time. We were riding along, laughing, probably picking on her brother, when we saw an old shack out in one of the cornfields. The corn wasn't fully grown, so we were able to see most of it. We decided to explore it, because why not? I'm 33 now, so bear with my memory. I don't remember much about the episode, but I do remember what I saw inside, and it still gives me the creeps to this day. We peered inside, and the first thing we noticed were posters on the walls of the room. They were on every wall. There was a different person on every poster, and they looked angry. Some held guns pointed right at you. Some were pointing their finger, and it felt like they were pointing right at us with their eyes trained on us. In the center of the floor was a perfectly painted red circle. As we were staring at this creepy scene, I felt like we were being watched, and not by the posters. I looked to my right across the gravel road and into the cornfield across from us. Standing in the middle of the field was a man. He was just watching us. He was not waving his arms, not yelling at us, just watching. I alerted my friends, and we looked at him together. I awkwardly waved, and he continued to just stand there and not wave back. We were sufficiently creeped out, so we jumped onto our bikes to get away. We were on gravel, which is not easy to bike on, so it took us a while to get going. We biked away, and I repeatedly turned around to see if he was there and still watching us. He barely moved, and only turned his body slightly to angle in our direction to keep watching. I can't get over how he just appeared in the middle of the field like that. Eventually, once we had biked a good distance away, we saw him start walking away out of our view. Recently, I've been thinking about this, so my friend, her brother, and I started a group chat. We all shared what we remembered, and they both recalled it the same way I did. What I didn't know was that when we went back the next day, everything was gone, even the red paint on the floor. A week later, whoever owned the shack donated it to the fire department to be burned. I don't know what was going on in that shack. Some thoughts have been weird rituals, target practice for some militia dude, or just some creepy guy who had a poor taste in decor. Whatever it was, it still weirds me out to this day. This happened at night in the middle of nowhere about 8 years ago. It was after 11 p.m. and I was taking my dogs out for their last bathroom walk before bed. At the time, I was living in a rural area. Houses far apart, lots of wooded lots around, with wild pigs often crossing our path. I would often take long walks, because one of the dogs had a problem with having accidents in the morning if he didn't have an adequate walk to do all his business. It was dark, so I had the flashlight, and I was not expecting to meet anyone out in the middle of nowhere so late at night. But ahead of me appeared on the opposite side of the road another flashlight. We had a few neighbors, but of the homes around, I knew most all of them from over the years. On rare occasions, someone else may be walking a dog, but I could count the times that happened on my fingers. As I passed by the other flashlight at night, I noticed a tall, pale man who I had never seen before cross the street to my side and began to follow behind me. He yelled out, "Hey, I like your dogs. Can I pet them?" I stayed calm, walking briskly and ignoring him. My house was close, and I was almost home at the end of my walk. He continued to follow me, yelling, "Hey, what's your name? I just want to pet your dogs." He had a thick East European accent. I ignored him and ran up to my house through the door, locked it, and then ran into my bedroom. I told my husband that there was a strange man who had followed me home, and that I was super disturbed that he knew where I lived. My brave husband immediately ran out of the house, I guess to find this guy. I was on pins and needles waiting for him to come back. He came back home with his steel baseball bat in hand. He said he had caught up to the guy and asked him who he was and why he was following around a woman at basically midnight being a creep. The guy said he was new to town and was walking around hoping to meet people and make some friends. Basically, his story was bizarre and totally didn't make sense. You don't do that at midnight in a rural area in the middle of nowhere. You do that in a city setting at a normal hour. My husband told him that if he ever saw him again near our house, he would break his knees with the baseball bat. And I didn't see him again until 2 years later in a neighboring city. I was out with a girlfriend looking at an art museum when I turned a corner and it was him. I could never forget his face. He looked straight at me, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but I knew who he was from that night 2 years ago, which was still very strange. He said something like, "Oh, you're the girl from that night with the dogs." I don't remember what I even said back, because I was in disbelief. The exact same guy, again with the thick European accent, tall, skinny, and pale. This time I had run into him in a public museum, so I can't fault him much since it was a public place, but it was still creepy that he remembered me from the dark night 2 years ago. I grabbed my friend's arm and quickly walked in the opposite direction, and we left the museum. I told her the story as we left the museum, and thankfully she understood. Also thankfully, I never saw him again. Back when I was in college in Texas, my roommates and I decided to drive to Boulder, Colorado for spring break. It was another girl and I, along with our 2 male roommates. To maximize our time in Boulder, we decided to take shifts driving and go all the way through the night rather than stopping for overnight stays. It was roughly an 18-hour trip. So I was driving my shift when we reached the Texas Panhandle in the early morning hours. We were out in the middle of nowhere and had not seen a single car in either direction for ages when we noticed headlights behind us. The car came up on us quickly, then followed behind for some time. Oddly, it would get really close to us, then back off real far, then get close again. This pattern continued for several miles. Suddenly, the headlights were joined by red and blue police lights. It was so dark out there that we had not seen the light bar on the hood and had not realized we were being followed by a cop. I checked my speedometer and I was not speeding, so we were all wondering why we were getting pulled over, but I went ahead and pulled over to the shoulder. Up came a cop wearing a cowboy hat to my window. He shined his light in the car and looked us over, then asked me to get out of the car. I hesitated at first, but there were 3 other people in the car, so I wasn't feeling particularly unsafe at this point. I grabbed my wallet, got out, and stood against the driver's door. The cop looked at my license and insurance, then told me that he was going to do a sobriety test. I was thinking, why would I need to do that? But I haven't had anything to drink, so I did it anyways. The way the cop directed me for the walking in a straight line test had me ending my walk right by his car. When I finished, he reached over to open his back passenger's door and told me to get in. I said, "What? Why?" He said that I should sit in his car while he looked up my license. Now, I had heard how doors on the back of cop cars can only open from the outside, so I knew if I got into his car and he closed the door, I wouldn't be able to get out. It was like 3 a.m. in the morning, pitch black darkness, on a road dozens of miles from any civilization, and I decided I was not getting in that car. My exact words were, "I'm sorry, sir, with all respect and for my own safety, I do not want to get into the back of your car." He angrily responded with, "What did you say to me?" I repeated my statement again, being as nice as possible about it, and I stayed calm the whole time. He went back and forth like this for several minutes, with him being really angry and threatening to arrest my friends and I and hold us overnight. Finally, he gave up trying to get me into the back of his car, and he said to me, "What are you afraid of, being kidnapped?" Personally, I thought that was a really strange and messed up thing to say. I glanced towards my car and saw my friends piled to the back window watching, with the 2 guys looking ready to jump out. The cop turned to look at them too. I don't know what went through his mind, but after being completely aggressive with me for what seemed like forever, he finally gave me a creepy smile. He handed me back my license and insurance, tipped his hat, and then got into his car and drove off. He didn't give me a ticket or even mention what I had done wrong or why he had pulled me over. At that point, I was shaking so badly that my friends had to help me get back in the car. To this day, I think about that cop deciding to terrorize a young college female at 3 a.m. in the middle of rural Texas, and I often wonder what would have happened if I had not stood my ground and instead gotten inside of his cop car. I wondered if he would have tried to take advantage of me in the back seat of his car, and I also wonder if he was even a real cop or not. When I was a 15-year-old girl and my best friend, who I will call Ari, was 14, we had a scary encounter. We were huge stoners back then. We were young, but our whole friend group was skaters, so we ended up smoking a lot. It had been raining all day, and it was going to be a rainy night as well, and as our friends were all skaters, it wasn't shocking that nobody wanted to hang out that night. Wet ground means no skating normally. Well, Ari and I still wanted to hang out, so we went out that night to smoke together. I can't recall if we left our homes and met up, or if we were already together in one of our homes and went out together. Either way, we went out and figured which of the many spots for smoking would be the driest. We settled on this one at the handball courts of my elementary school. I'm going to try to describe this spot as best I can. So, it was a yard to my elementary school with handball courts, and we sat on a bench under a massive tree. In front of us was a large concrete slope going down for the teachers to drive up and park. We would have to stand up and then walk down the slope in order to exit. At the bottom of the slope was a bunch of basketball courts, like 10 of them, and behind that was a large playground. It was public park property stuff, but somewhat connected to the school. This night was very quiet, and we hadn't seen anybody outside because of the wet weather. It was our summer break, so adults were likely asleep preparing for work the next day. We were sitting on this bench smoking and playing music. I noticed from far away, at the end of the basketball courts and just before the playground, a huge man was sitting there on a bench. I could tell from his silhouette that it was a big dude. I told Ari, and her being the more reckless of the two told me to relax and that we were fine. But me being the really on-guard type of person, I could not chill out. I kept telling her that something wasn't right, and I made her turn off the music. What was this clearly grown man doing in the wet, rainy park at midnight, totally alone? He himself wasn't smoking, he wasn't on his phone, and he was stiffly facing us directly. He didn't turn his head once our entire session. I mentioned this all to Ari towards the end of our session, and she finally agreed that something was really off. We were ready to leave though, so we didn't think it was a big deal and would just go. We kept an eye on the person down the bench as we left. Now, if you recall and understood my description, we had to walk down that slope to exit the area. This also meant getting closer to that guy. We would still be far from him, but closer than we were now, and he would obviously see the direction we were going for a minute as it was a big slope. We started heading down the concrete slope, and the whole time Ari and I were holding each other's hands tightly. My eyes didn't leave the guy for even a hair of a second. I was so focused, but also freaked the heck out. I kept telling Ari not to run away and to walk calmly, and I was probably trying to convince myself at the same time, to be honest. I just felt like if we started running, he would know we were scared. I can't explain why, but I felt like that would make things worse. We were not even halfway down the slope when the dude very slowly and stiffly rose up from the bench. My eyes were locked onto him, and he was huge. Then, in one swift movement, he went from totally frozen to darting directly towards us. I mean, this guy was seriously running, and his legs were so long his strides were massive. The second he took off directly for us, Ari and I dropped our grip from each other and bolted down the slope into the middle of the road. We were running and screaming, and all I could imagine was him grabbing one of us. Like I said, it was totally a wasteland outside that night. So even what was usually a busier street during the day was so dead so late at night in bad weather. I'm not sure why, but I guess we telepathically agreed to run towards where our group usually hung out when we weren't smoking. The park that was across the street and down the block. It was a block that we went around the basketball courts, so the entire run we could see the guy darting towards us and making his way onto the road behind us. We thought by some small chance we'd see our friends hanging out at the other park, but we were wrong and it was deserted. I could feel both of us becoming exhausted when we realized we probably wouldn't see anyone for over a mile, and that if we did, it would be by absolute luck on a night like tonight. We ran and ran until we reached an overpass of a highway that was still empty, but at least it had more streetlights. We hadn't looked back for a while now, but when we reached the overpass, we noticed that the huge guy was gone. I'm not sure what made him quit. Maybe he realized we were not to be messed with, or that he underestimated how fast we were or how far we could run without getting tired. Maybe he just wanted to scare us. I'll never know, and I don't really care to know either. I live in northern British Columbia, Canada. A couple of years ago, my friend had invited me to come with him, his mom, and his sister to a resort by a lake an hour and a half or so out of town. This was the end of June and beginning of July. The place is called a resort, but it's more like a cabin in the woods type of place. There's a main log building where you check in, and it has a restaurant, a few log cabins, and some spots down by the lake for RVs to park in. There's a highway that you turn off up to the lot where the check-in building is, and to the right of the highway is forest for miles, as well as everywhere else around that area. Around the lake there's some houses and whatnot, but if it isn't a long weekend, there's not too many people out there. The cabins and RV area is separate, and the main building is about a 5 to 8 minute walk away from the cabins up a spiral road. A little bit past the main building, there's a clearing where you can sit at a couple of tables, and about 50 feet into the woods past those tables are two small lagoons surrounded by an old wire fence. When we got in for the evening, we unloaded the car, got acquainted with the log cabin, which was nice, and then we went out to explore around. Not too much interesting stuff happened the first day, as we didn't explore a whole lot before dark. Skip to the next day, and it was cloudy and raining, which we were hoping for, as that meant that there were very few people at the resort, and we'd get free reign over it. We explored down by the lake and around the cabin areas more thoroughly. and eventually we made our way up to the clearing where the tables are located. We looked at the tables to see that they hadn't been touched in what looked like a very long time from the amount of grass and weeds that was built up around them. While investigating, I took notice that around 50 feet or so back into the woods, there was what looked to be a clear area. We slid down into this ditch-like area, which was probably around an 8-foot difference in elevation from the table area, and trampled through the brush. We eventually came to this spot, which we were pretty sure were lagoons due to the way they were constructed, and we noticed that there was a wire fence around it. We tooled around the area looking at the lagoons, and eventually we left, planning to come back later in the day as it was getting time to eat dinner. The next day we went back to that area with the tables, planning to go into the lagoon area once again, but before we had a chance to go down the ditch, we stopped because of a noise. The noise we heard were 2 small twigs being walked over and snapped in the lagoon and ditch area we had traveled the previous day. We stuck around for about 10 minutes or so until we got hit with an intense feeling of dread at being attacked by a bear or some other animal that could be walking around in the lagoon area. We went back to our cabin where we played poker for the rest of the night. While playing, we discussed the events that had taken place and eventually laughed it off, saying it was probably just a bear passing through or rabbits in the area. The next day, it was raining heavily and much darker than the past couple of days. We left our cabin and planned to go to the lagoon area later, but we wanted to chill around a medium forested area close to the cabins first. We were messing around in the woods, breaking big sticks on trees. Suddenly, we had heard what sounded to be someone else doing the same thing about 200 feet away in the direction we were facing. It was hard to judge how far exactly it was because the way the forest carries sound, but it was far in front of us. At first, we thought it was an echo, but after experimenting a little more, we found out that it wasn't an echo. Someone or something out there was also banging sticks, copying us. We wouldn't have cared too much about this until we took notice of where it was. The entire area around there and beyond was all forested and not near any of the cabins. Having someone in those forests along with us that far in, and in the less favorable weather with being very few people at the resort at that time, was unlikely. We decided to leave the area and come back later during the evening. So after leaving the area, we went back around to the lagoon area and listened for a couple minutes. We couldn't hear any walking, so we assumed that we were right about it being a passing forest creature yesterday. Not even 5 minutes into us being around the lagoon area, I told my friend to stop moving. We both stopped and listened. We heard what sounded to be the footsteps again, but as they were coming in louder and faster, we got that same overbearing feeling of dread. We hightailed it out of there spooked, and we booked it back to our cabin. Later that evening, we returned to the forest clearing area where we had heard the branch against the tree noise earlier in the day. We again started smacking branches against trees, this time not hearing anything, but as I turned to my left, something caught my eye. There was what appeared to be a person standing behind a tree, and I saw them duck behind it when they noticed that I noticed them. I nearly screamed, but I held it in and immediately told my friend that we needed to get out of there, and we sprinted back to the cabin. Later that night, while sitting in the loft area where our beds were, we discussed what had happened the last 2 days. The area that I had seen the person was in the exact same area where we had heard the mimic banging earlier that day. Also, both days we had been down near the lagoon area and had heard footsteps walking around. It was very creepy as there was too much of a coincidence for the person or figure I had seen to not have been watching us and following where we were going both days. Very strange activity as it was a rainy day and night both days that we were out exploring. We left the next day as our booking had ended, and I was happy that I didn't have to stay there any longer being constantly watched.
My name is Josh, and I'm currently 20 as I'm writing this. This happened almost 4 months ago when I moved out of state to start my first semester of college. My financial aid would not cover housing, so I found myself scrambling to find off-campus housing. Fortunately, with the help of my parents, I was able to rent out a house for 2 semesters. It was this small one-storied home that was just a hop, skip, and a jump from campus. It wasn't the nicest house, but it was what I could afford at the time. The majority of people in the surrounding homes were a lot older than me, though that was expected when living off campus. However, there was this one guy who lived a couple houses down that gave off a really weird vibe. If I had to guess, I'd say he had to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He would go on long walks with his dog really early in the morning and knock on my door to say good morning. At first, it wasn't that strange, but he began doing this every day, which made me a bit irritated. On top of this, he would always try to strike up these long, unnecessary conversations that I wasn't interested in. If I ever made up an excuse as to why I couldn't talk to him, he'd disregard my words and do it anyway. It even came to a point where I told him I was late for class, and he had walked with me to campus. The only time he'd ever leave is if I went into class or in one of the buildings. No matter how many times I tried getting him to go away, he still persisted. I'd give him a dry response, he'd only talk more. I'd walk faster, he'd walk faster. This went on for a good 2 weeks before I finally told him in the most polite way to leave me alone in the mornings as I had school. He seemed to have understood, but also gave me this look of pure disappointment. I felt bad, but I legitimately couldn't have him doing what he's been doing anymore. I remember one of the other neighbors telling me he apparently suffered from some personality disorder, but that he didn't have a history of violence or anything. I asked why he seemed to only be acting like this towards me, and he told me that it wasn't his place to decide who lived there, as that decision was up to the property manager. Weeks went by, and I hadn't seen him at my door, nor did I see him come out of his house with his dog. I thought of this as suspicious, but dismissed it as him respecting my wishes by leaving me alone. Those weeks were normal, with me focusing on my studies, being social with friends, etc. Life went on as usual after that, until one night where something happened I didn't expect. I was in my room studying for one of my midterms when I hear something small hit my window. The curtains were covered, so I wasn't able to see what it was. About 10 seconds later, I hear it again and then came to the conclusion that it was a small rock hitting my window. This time, I got up and opened my curtains to see the man standing still as a statue outside. As if that wasn't strange enough by itself, he wasn't even on the sidewalk, but rather on the driveway of the house. By this point, it was decently late and decided to call it a night. I simply ignored him by closing my curtains, even though I was terrified inside. I shut off all the lights, making sure to lock every door and window in the house to ensure he didn't come in. The next morning, I carefully unlocked the front door to check if he was still out there. When the coast was clear, I booked it toward campus where I was constantly looking back to make sure I wasn't being followed. I went to my classes, hung out with some of my friends, and by the time evening hit, I walked back home and was met with a sight I wasn't expecting. There were about 3, maybe 4 police cars along with an ambulance parked outside my house, their lights flashing over the sound of radio chatter. I saw paramedics putting a man I had never seen before on a stretcher and into the ambulance. I then saw police handcuffing my creepy neighbor and putting him into a police cruiser. When I basically demanded to know what was going on, they told me that the person harmed was actually the meter reader. I completely forgot about this, as I've only ever met the meter reader once, and that was when I moved in. By law, a meter reader can typically enter a home whether you're there to let them in or not. He had keys to my house and entered through the back door to check the meters in the basement. Waiting for him in the basement was my neighbor, who jumped him with one of my kitchen knives and jammed it into his shoulder. The reason he was in my house was to probably wait for me until I got home. He must have mistaken the meter reader for me, and that's when he attacked. To my surprise, someone in the area had spotted the man entering the house through a window before the reader got there and called the police. A couple days later, I was moved to a different location off campus and was actually reimbursed for what my family paid. I'm graduating in a couple years, and while I'm definitely going to miss college, I sure hope I don't ever encounter something like that again. About 2 years ago, I bought a house for the first time ever at only 28 years old. It was my first ever real investment, you can say, and I couldn't be prouder of myself. I worked in the entertainment industry for big celebrities/social media influencers and stuff like that, so I made decent money. Most of my neighbors were nice. Some had kids, some didn't, and sort of just kept to themselves. It was just me and my dog Milo. Milo was a pure white Dogo Argentino with the height of a small horse and a bite so powerful it could tear a limb off. All I have to say is, good luck breaking into my house with him around. My first week of moving in, I met one of my neighbors who gave me the all too familiar greeting followed by a batch of sugar cookies. The usual welcoming you'd commonly see when someone moves into a new neighborhood. She introduced herself as Brenda and told me she had lived just up the street and that it was nice to meet me. She was the sweet little old lady who had the heart of gold and was a joy to anyone. Brenda had went on to explain that her cookies were homemade and that it was her very own recipe. Surprisingly enough, I was actually allergic to wheat flour, but I wasn't going to be rude and decline them. I just put them on the kitchen counter, wondering if I should throw them away or give them to someone in need. By this point, I had successfully moved everything in and decided to call some of my childhood friends over to come and celebrate with some beer. It was already 9 and I had to get to bed early for work the next morning, so I knew my friends couldn't stay long. When they arrived, we had seen a football game on TV, had some dinner, and just enjoyed ourselves. At one point, we're all talking amongst ourselves, having a blast with beers in our hands, when I see Milo staring at me in this weird position. I playfully asked him what was up, and he responded with faint whimpers as he laid back down. It was then when I immediately knew something was wrong. I had Milo for almost 5 years now, and not once did I ever see him behave like this. Now, I'm obviously no expert or anything, but it was almost as if his attitude kept changing every few minutes. One minute he'd be happy, the next he'd be sad, and the next minute just flat out angry. His demeanor completely altered. One of my friends had a girlfriend who was a vet, and he was able to FaceTime her where I was able to tell her what was going on. She immediately started asking if I fed him something he shouldn't have eaten or if he were on medication. I was about to say no when I remembered about the cookies I had left on the table. Sure enough, I found a chewed up plastic plate along with half a dozen of those cookies devoured scattered across the hallway. Milo must have helped himself to my special treat when I wasn't looking, and I guess I didn't notice until now. 2 of my friends had to leave while the other one had decided to help me rush Milo to the vet. Turns out, he was just on the verge of death when we got there, as the vet explained he was displaying unusual symptoms. They ran a few tests on him, and what they found shocked them to their core. High traces of brodifacoum were found in Milo's system. It's a seriously dangerous poison used for killing larger rodents like possums and other pests. When ingested or consumed by humans, it causes your body to shut down your organs to the point where your body doesn't even know how to fight it off. It starts off mild, but gradually develops over a few hours. We later found out that it had been embedded inside of the cookies. Law enforcement had taken down my information about the woman who gave me those cookies, and after a whole search of the neighborhood, she was never found. To be completely honest with you, I wasn't even sure if she even lived in the neighborhood. Why she targeted me and why she laced the cookies with rodent poison is still unclear. Milo thankfully ended up living and is still the happiest companion I know. My wife and I got married and just had our first kid who absolutely adores Milo. I'll protect them all with my life.
I lived in that apartment for just under a year. It was a ground floor, 1 bedroom on the east side of the complex. A really old building with cheap carpet. That kind of place where your neighbors are close enough to hear you sneeze through that drywall. Still, I guess it was peaceful enough. Most of the tenants were middle-aged or older. Quiet folks with too much debt and not enough ambition. You'd hear the occasional shouting match through the vents or catch a late-night party teetering towards chaos, but it was rare. The cops would come maybe twice that whole first 6 months, and neither time did it seem like anything major. For me, I just kept to myself, worked really long hours, came home, ate dinner, watched some TV, and then went to bed. I didn't need noise. I'd had my time in louder and messier places. At this point in my life, this apartment was supposed to be my safe haven, my first real grown-up place, and for a while that's exactly what it was. And things didn't start to get weird until Flynn moved in. He showed up on a Wednesday morning, and I remember it because his moving van was blocking my car in. I had to bang on the cab just to get out to work. He didn't apologize, just gave me this blank stare like he hadn't heard a word that I just said to him. Thin guy, probably in his 40s, but somehow ageless in this way that made it hard to pin him down. Black hoodie, gloves in June, old army boots with the laces triple knotted. Not the kind of look you expect from somebody moving into a low-income housing. I couldn't tell if he was crazy or just eccentric. I introduced myself, got his first name, and that was as much as he was willing to share, at least in the moment. He moved in fast, and within 2 hours the van was gone and Flynn was holed up behind his door and just disappeared. That first week was really quiet, but something about the air near his place started to feel charged, like standing far too close to a buzzing transformer. At night, I'd hear the faint click of metal or the low scratch of something being dragged across concrete out on his patio. Nothing dramatic or nothing you'd call the cops over, but I just noticed it, and it was always after midnight. By week 2, I knew the guy was a complete weirdo. The first time I saw the fire, I thought maybe he was just grilling. I stepped out onto my patio and smelled the burning paper almost immediately. Not charcoal, not meat, just scorched papers and something that smelled like melted plastic. I peered around the divider and there he was. Flynn crouched over this big metal coffee can, feeding papers into the flame like he was praying to it. The way he stared into it, it wasn't normal. It wasn't boredom, but almost devotion. I grew up Baptist. I've seen that same kind of look on people's faces during prayer and sermon. This guy moved in next door to me and he was out of his damn mind. I stood there watching until he glanced my way, not moving, just locking eyes. He didn't say a word, just reached out slowly and placed a lid over the fire, snuffing it out instantly. Then he went back inside. I didn't really sleep that much that night. Just the whole thing kind of put me off. A few nights after that fire, I noticed a new wrinkle in the routine. Flynn had started dragging something across his floor around 2 a.m. This slow and heavy scraping sound, like furniture being moved an inch at a time. I knew it wasn't just my imagination because the baseboard heater on our shared wall would buzz whenever he did it. It only lasted a few minutes, but it was always that same exact sound, like a piece of metal being hauled across tile. I started jotting it all down in a notebook, not because I thought anything criminal was going on, but because I had a feeling that it might get there. Next came the SUV. It was one of those matte black Suburbans you only see in movies or government stings. No plates, tinted windows dark enough to double as mirrors. The first time it showed up, I thought maybe Flynn was dealing drugs or maybe some high-level courier gig or something worse, I don't know. But the men who stepped out didn't look like drug runners, no gold chains or neck tattoos. These guys wore crisp, matching suits, moved like military. Clean-shaven, stoic faces, no wasted movement. They went straight to Flynn's door and knocked once, then walked in without even waiting. The door just opened. I didn't hear any yelling, no loud conversations, not even laughter. Just the creak of the furniture and some soft footsteps. I think they stayed maybe 2 hours, then left in that same coordinated fashion, almost like a drill team. The visit happened 3 times in the span of 2 weeks. I attempted to ask Flynn about it. We crossed paths near the mailboxes one morning and I gave him this friendly nod. Asked if he was settling in okay. He didn't look up, just muttered something that sounded almost like fine and kept walking. I followed him a few steps, not aggressively, just to keep the conversation going. I asked him if that black SUV was family or maybe a security firm or something. That's when he stopped, turned, and looked right through me. You know, I'd just mind your own business if I were you, he said. His voice was flat, but there was weight behind it, like a warning that he'd given before. Not angry, not defensive, just a matter-of-fact threat. the kind of man makes when he's not bluffing. I backed up because what more could I do? This guy was clearly mental and also had some kind of security hookup that I did not want to mess with. Still, I couldn't help myself. I bought a cheap dash cam and parked facing the walkway, angled it just enough to catch whoever came or went. I started recording all the late night visits, but after the third black SUV sighting, nothing had happened for weeks. No more fires, no more visitors. Flynn didn't leave his apartment during the day, at least from what I could tell. I started to wonder if he'd even moved out or maybe he was dead up there. Then a couple showed up. It was a Friday night. I just sat down to eat when I heard the purr of a low-slung engine outside. Not a junker or a pickup, this was luxury. I peeked through the blinds and saw a silver McLaren pulled into the visitor spot. Two people got out, a man and a woman, both in these tailored coats and dressed like they were heading to the red carpet. The woman wore heels so sharp they clicked like gunshots. The man had this navy blazer, clean jawline, hair trimmed to the millimeter. They walked straight to Flynn's unit. He opened up the door before they knocked, and I promise you, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The following wasn't quiet like the other visits. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clipped and strained, urgent, bordering on angry. There was pacing, raised voices, Flynn's deeper tone trying to stay calm while the younger guy seemed to push back harder. The woman said very little, but when she did speak, it cut through like a knife. Then abruptly it all stopped. All three of them walked out calmly, almost robotically, and Flynn escorted them to their car. He even smiled as they drove off. And that was that. Over those next few days, the silence felt deliberate. Not a creak, not a scrape. Flynn's blinds were always shut tight. The lights were never on, so no smells even coming from his vent. This deep quiet had now settled in. Not long after all of this, a smell did come. It hit me the following Thursday. Just a sour tinge at first, like spoiled milk or wet garbage left out for far too long, but by Friday it was unbearable. I thought maybe something died in the crawl space, so I reported it to the management. They said somebody would come check it out, but nobody did. Saturday morning I left for work with the windows open, my shirt collar pulled over my face. When I got back that evening, the parking lot was filled with patrol cars. 2 cruisers, an unmarked black unit, and an ambulance. Yellow tape across Flynn's door. A crime scene tech squatting by the patio with a clipboard. One of the black-suited men that I'd seen before was now standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching the cops work. He wasn't saying anything. I stood at the far edge of the lot until one of the officers noticed me. He walked over, a really tall guy, maybe his mid-40s, looked really tired, and I asked what was going on. "We found somebody deceased in the unit," he said. "You one of the neighbors?" "Yeah, he lived next door to me. I've been smelling something awful all week." "Well, that was probably him," the officer said flatly. "He's been dead at least that long, and we're still trying to confirm ID." That gave me an opening. I started telling him everything: the fires, the SUV visits, the couple in the sports car, the midnight dragging sound. The officer scribbled down some notes, nodding now and again, but never really looked surprised. "We're not treating this as a homicide, at least at this time," he said finally. "There was no signs of forced entry, no external injuries. Coroner thinks it was natural." I must have looked skeptical because he gave me this half shrug. "These things happen," he said. "Weird guy, weird life. Doesn't always mean some kind of foul play." I watched as they zipped up the body bag and loaded it into the ambulance. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, staring at that thin wall between my unit and Flynn's. I thought about everything that I'd seen, everything that I'd heard, and just kept coming back to one detail that I hadn't shared. That last time I saw him, after the couple left, I caught a glimpse of something strange through a sliding door. Just a flash or a reflection maybe. But it looked like a metal table bolted to the floor with heavy leather straps hanging off the sides. It wasn't there before. What apartment would come with something like that? They cleared out Flynn's unit by the following Monday. No hazmat suits, no media coverage, just quiet men with gloves and cardboard boxes. Management didn't send out a notice or even acknowledge the death. I only knew he was officially gone when a cleaning crew came by and gutted the place, ripped up the carpet, pulled the blinds, emptied the fridge. I watched from behind my own curtains that entire time. Nobody took that metal table though, or at least I never saw it come out. It stayed there, square in the center of the room, covered with the tarp. When the crew left for lunch, I slipped out and peeked through the patio door. The straps that I'd seen weren't leather, they were thick canvas, army surplus style, stained with something dark around the buckles. There was a groove in the floor beneath it, almost like scoring from repeated dragging, the kind that you don't get from just one piece of furniture. Flynn had indeed died in that apartment, that much I knew, but nothing about it felt natural at all to me. I'd say a week later, I saw the black SUV again. No police on site this time, no lights, no noise. It pulled up around 5 in the morning and stayed parked for nearly an hour. Nobody went in, nobody came out. Then it just drove off, slow and casual, like it had all the time in the world. I tried looking up Flynn on the internet, but I had no last name to go on. I checked the public records, scanned some arrest reports, even pulled some county death records. Nothing. It was like this guy never existed. The unit stayed empty for months, then eventually a young couple ended up moving in. They hung these fairy lights on the patio, brought a baby home from the hospital, watered plants. Nice people, friendly. But occasionally on warm nights, when they leave the patio door cracked open, I could swear that I hear the same dragging sound through the wall. And I ask myself, what that unsuspecting family might be living on top of.
A couple of years back, I attempted to sell my car on Craigslist. I was told by a friend it was a good place to buy and sell cars, and I knew that if I wanted to get the most money I could for the car, I would have to sell it that way. I listed the car at what I thought was a fair price. It was a 2009 Ford Fiesta with a little over 100,000 miles on it. Nothing was really wrong with the car, but I wanted something newer and I also wanted something a little bit larger. So I took some pictures and I listed it on Craigslist. I hadn't had any experience on Craigslist to that point. I thought that the website looked kind of archaic when I first went on it, and for some reason it made me think that it was kind of sketchy. But I thought hundreds of people use this every day and it works fine. So I went ahead with the listing. After posting the car online that I was selling, the next day I got a response. The way that it would work was that your phone number would go on the listing at the bottom. People who are interested would then text you. The first text that I received asked if the car was still available. I said yes. Then whoever this was asked to come over and look at it. I knew better than to invite some random stranger to my house though. I said that we should meet someplace else. The person responded saying no, they wanted to come to my house and look at the car. Immediately that seemed suspicious to me. Why would it be such a big deal? There were several businesses nearby. I said that I would feel a lot more comfortable meeting in a public parking lot. The person once more said that I could just give them my address and they would come over. At that point, I stopped responding. They weren't seeming to get it that I did not want them to come to my house. If somebody was that insistent on going to my house, then maybe they had bad intentions or something other than to look at my car. They texted again, but I ignored it. So I didn't get any other interest in the car that day. The next day, however, I did get another text regarding the car from a different number. This person said they were interested in the car and asked if they could look at it. I said yes, and right away suggested a local shopping center parking lot to meet at. The person said yes. We arranged for that night at 7 o'clock for them to look at the car. The person didn't really give me any information about themselves. I finally asked what they looked like and a name so I would know who I was meeting with. He said his name was John, and that was it. So when the time came, I drove the car to the local shopping center, which was about 5 minutes away. When I got there, the parking lot was mostly empty at the back, so that's where I went. I was a little nervous meeting someone from Craigslist for the first time, but I figured that we were in a very public place and the guy probably wanted to buy my car. A few minutes later, and I saw another car pull into the parking lot. It was a new-looking vehicle and it drove right over to me. After parking, a man got out. I got out of my car and I went over to meet him. I asked if he was John and he paused for a moment before saying yes. The guy seemed sort of sketchy from the start. I thought that maybe I was just paranoid. He then walked over to the car and started looking at it. Within 2 minutes, he said to me, "I don't want this car." Then he started to walk away. I was thinking that it was really weird, but whatever. I said bye to John and he walked back to his car and then got inside. Then I went back inside of my car. I was so confused at the whole thing. Why did he want to look at the car? He didn't test drive it or anything. He could have seen online everything that he saw in person. So at that point, I started to drive home. I noticed that John started leaving at the same time as me. He drove behind me out of the parking lot. Then, as I drove down the street, he was also driving behind me. We went in the same direction for a while, and when I turned, he turned. I got suspicious at that point. I drove around a little and paid attention to John behind me. Every time that I would turn, he would turn as well. It seemed very suspicious. Enough suspicion for me to not want to drive home anymore. Instead, I just started making random turns and going down random streets. John did everything that I did. I didn't know what to do or where to go. Then I had an idea and I just started honking my horn constantly as I drove. I don't know why that's what I thought to do, but I did. He followed me for a good minute and then decided to stop. John turned at a random street and I kept going. Then I carefully drove all the rest of the way back home. Thankfully, I did not see John for the rest of the way back. When I got home, I felt lucky to have made it home all right. And that's when I remembered the other number that had texted me about the car, how they wanted to go to my house so badly. I realized that maybe it was the same person. Maybe John simply got a new number or phone and texted me with that. Then he would just follow me home to see where I lived. And that would also explain why he seemed sketchy and seemed to have no real interest in the car. I'm also guessing that John was not his real name. What that man's true intentions were, I don't know, but I'm glad I don't have to find out. I took my car off Craigslist after that and sold it to a dealer. I may have not made as much money as I was capable of, but at least I stayed safe. When I was in college during my junior year, I lived in a house with another roommate. It was a 2-bedroom house, and my roommate Bianca was good friends with me. We met freshman year, and our senior year we were going to be living as roommates in an apartment instead of a house. The house was cool overall, but the apartment was going to be a little nicer. I remember that we got this crappy couch from Bianca's parents that we had when we lived in the house. We wanted to get rid of it when we were moving to the apartment. The couch was pretty large, and for the apartment we were not going to be bringing it over. So towards the end of our lease, a few days before we were going to move into the apartment, we decided to give the couch away. It was in pretty good shape, and if someone wanted it, they could take it. If not, we would just throw it away. We listed it for free on Craigslist and took some pictures of it and stuff. A few days went by and there was no interest. Then I remembered that Bianca told me someone was coming over to take it later on in the day. I asked who, and she just said some guy. Bianca had made the listing and was kind of taking care of things, so I just said okay, and I was glad we were getting rid of it. So sometime that afternoon, I heard Bianca say that the guy was going to be there soon. I went down into the living room and we had the couch there as well as some chairs and a coffee table and some other stuff. There were boxes around because we were preparing to move. The couch was large and would be at least a 2-person job to move it, so I was going to help. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang and a man was there on the front step. We opened the door and let him inside to see the couch. He said that he had a pickup truck and we looked outside and saw a pretty large one. The man then started looking at the couch. He went around it to all corners and seemed to be measuring to see if it would fit in his truck. We made some basic average small talk about stuff during this time. Overall, he seemed like a pretty normal guy for the most part. Then we helped him pick up the couch and carry it out the door and to his truck. After that, he left and our couch was finally gone. Now, fast forward to later that night. It was about 9 or 10 o'clock. I remember that Bianca told me that the guy who got the couch had just texted her again. He asked her if he had forgotten his wallet at our house by chance. My first reaction was, how on earth would he forget his wallet in our house? I thought there was no way. He was barely inside and didn't pay us or anything. Still, we looked around a little. The guy texted again saying he thought it might have fallen out of his pocket on the floor while he was lifting the couch or something. We looked and at first still didn't see anything. Then I moved one of the chairs in the living room to see a small black wallet. It was like directly underneath the center of the chair. I really have no idea how it could get that far underneath if it had just simply fallen out of his pocket, but nevertheless, it was there. I looked inside of it and there was no driver's license. However, there was 3 $1 bills and what appeared to be a debit card. That was it. Really not much for a wallet. So Bianca texted him that we had it, and he said that he would be there in about 10 minutes. Now, this is when things get really weird. Like just 2 or 3 minutes after that, I went to turn on the outside light to the front step. When I did, I saw what looked like the man walking sort of in our yard. He was barely in my sight and kind of walking between our yard and the neighbors. I moved to get a better look, but he had walked away. I only saw him for like a second. I didn't see his truck parked in the street or anything though. Then I went up to my bedroom to get a better look at the side yard and backyard. When I did, I actually saw the guy again. He walked around to the backyard and then was sort of looking at the house. It was really creepy. The lighting back there was not good at all, so I could honestly barely see him. Bianca came up and was looking as well. We were asking each other what the man was doing. Bianca was so creeped out that she said she didn't even want to give him his wallet back anymore. We were seriously considering calling the police. Then we noticed a man walk out of the end of the backyard and into the neighbors behind us' backyard. So after that, he was out of our sight. Then maybe 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. Bianca and I went down and looked out of the living room window to see the guy standing on the front step. He knocked on the door again moments later. Bianca went over to the door but did not open it. She said from the other side that we had his wallet. The man then asked for the door to be opened so that he could come in. Bianca said no, she would just hand him the wallet and he would leave. The man did not seem happy with this. He seemed surprised and asked what the problem was. We didn't want to let him know that we saw him in the yard for fear of how he might react. Bianca just said that he needed to take his wallet and then leave. I remember the man started saying how he was going to give us both a cash reward for giving him his wallet back if we would let him in. I was thinking, what is he going to give us, $1 each? Because there were only $3 in the wallet. Maybe he had more money on him, but nevertheless, I didn't really believe it. In fact, this only creeped us out more. Bianca did not open or unlock the door. Instead, she just took the wallet and walked over to a window. Then she opened it up and threw the wallet out in the direction of the man. She said, "There's your wallet, now go." Then she closed the window quickly. The man picked up the wallet, but knocked on the door again, saying that he wanted to give us a cash reward. That's when Bianca yelled at him and threatened to call the police. Finally, the man left. We were both very creeped out by his behavior. We stayed up late, but thankfully he did not return. Days later, we moved into our apartment and had no more problems with the guy. Looking back, Bianca and I both think that the man planted a fake wallet under the chair. He obviously wanted an excuse to go back to our place. Why, I don't know. A couple of summers ago, I was looking to buy a golf cart. I live a little out in the country, and there are a lot of roads and paths nearby that would be great for it. And my yard is also pretty large as well, and I've been thinking about making a path. So I remember that I started looking for one on Craigslist. There were a few in the area, and I found one that was probably the best deal. It was a new listing, and it was looking like a good golf cart. I contacted the seller and asked if it was still available, which it was. The listing said that it worked fine and ran great. I decided that I would like to buy it, and I asked the owner if I could come over and see it. If all lined up and it was what the ad said, then I would like to buy it. So I got the address from the seller and we agreed to meet there the next day. When I arrived, it was about 10 minutes away off an old country dirt road. In this particular area, most people have very large properties of at least 5 or 10 acres, sometimes many more. This property looked to be very large. I parked on the side of the street, and then there was a long driveway that I walked up, and I saw a guy walking towards me. This was the seller, and he said hi to me, and I said that I was there to see the golf cart. He said that he was going to take me to it, and then we walked over towards his garage. There was another golf cart there, and the man told me to hop on. The guy selling the cart appeared to be in his 50s or so and had grayish hair. He said that he would drive me to the cart that he was selling. So I got on, and the man started to drive away. We went behind his house, and then we went onto this trail that led into the woods. I was wondering where exactly we were going. I thought that if he was trying to sell the golf cart that it would already be in his driveway maybe. Still, I didn't ask him at that point. We drove down this path through the woods, and the farther we got, the more dense the woods became. I was amazed at how large his property was, or at least how far we were driving down the trail. At one point, he turned left and went down another trail in the woods. Then he turned right at another path. I'm not even joking when I tell you we were driving on trails through the woods for at least 10 minutes. It was kind of loud, so nobody really said anything. I kept thinking that we had to be close, but we just kept going and going, deeper and deeper into the woods. And the longer we were, the more I thought that maybe I should just leave. It seemed sort of sketchy. After a long time, I finally spoke up, and I asked the man why it was so far away. The man just turned to me and said, "Well, this golf cart isn't technically mine." I didn't know what he meant by that at all, or how that related to driving into the woods for the longest time. I sat there thinking about what he said. Then I just wanted to leave. For a while, I was too nervous to say anything. Then I finally spoke up. I said, "I changed my mind. Can we just go back?" The man turned and laughed a little and said, "Oh no, we're in too deep now, son." He just kept right on going. Then, I don't know if it was just instincts or what, but as we approached a small bridge, I just leaped off the golf cart. I hit the ground and fell down, but was not injured. The golf cart slammed to a stop up ahead. I quickly got to my feet and then ran over and jumped down around a bridge towards the stream that went under it. There was this really small and shallow stream. It was maybe 6 feet wide with many rocks on the edge, and the water only being maybe 2 feet deep at the deepest point. I just started running along the stream through the woods. The man did not seem to get off the golf cart and chase after me though. I just kept running and running, and then after a while changed to a jog. After about 10 minutes of that, I finally hit the end of the property. There was a dirt road that I could tell was not part of the man's property anymore. So I took out my phone and I barely had a signal. I then directed my way back off instincts and was thankfully able to make it back. When I returned to my car, I saw that there was now a closed gate blocking off the driveway of the property that I had just visited. I got in my truck and went home and never went on Craigslist again. This was my scariest experience using Craigslist. It takes place many years ago now. So I was looking around on the free ads, which I did kind of a lot back then. I didn't have that much money and was always looking for good deals or cool things for free. I didn't get a whole lot of things, but I had managed to buy a few cheap deals over the years. So I remember that I saw this TV that was for free. The ad didn't really say much. It just had a picture of a pretty nice looking TV that was on the floor of a room. The TV was on, and the ad just said, "TV for free, works fine, no problems." That was all the information that it had. The city was pretty close by, so I decided to text the owner. I figured, why not? I mean, it was free, so what's the worst that could happen? After contacting the owner of the TV, they told me to come by and get it that night at 10 p.m. I said okay. Looking back, that was pretty late, but I didn't question it. I figured maybe they worked late or something. And with the TV being free, I didn't feel like I should be nitpicking about when I got it. I mean, if it worked like it said, the TV was worth at least $100. Now, I never really wondered why somebody would give it away for free at the time. Maybe I just wanted to believe it, even though it seemed too good to be true. So that night, I set out to pick up the TV. I had the address and I put it in on my phone. It was like 10 minutes away, and when I got to the neighborhood, I got kind of nervous. It looked pretty sketchy and not the best area. It was quiet though. Most of the houses looked small and run down. I parked my car on the side of the street and got out anyways though. I texted the owner saying that I was there and they told me to come in and get the TV. So I walked up to the front door and knocked on it to be polite. I didn't want to just walk right in. As I knocked on the door, I didn't see any lights on inside really. I waited after knocking and nobody seemed to be coming to the door. This only made me feel even more nervous. Then, finally, I heard a woman's voice yell from inside the house, "Come on in." I could tell that she was not by the door, and I wasn't sure why she didn't answer it, but I did what she said and I walked in. The house was mostly dark, but there were a few dim lights on. To the left there was a living room, and to the right there was a small pantry. Straight ahead was a hallway and the kitchen and a dining room area. The woman was standing in the kitchen. I barely saw her, and she said, "You're here for the TV?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "It's up in the attic, you'll have to go get it." There was a ladder coming down from the ceiling with the door slightly open on the right side of the hallway just in front of the kitchen. The woman did not give any reason at all as to why she didn't bring the TV down herself or why she couldn't go up and get it. Even though everything in my mind and body was telling me not to go up there, I did anyways. I think it was just so awkward that I didn't know what else to do. I got to the ladder and started to take a few steps up. The woman then went around the corner and out of my sight. Meanwhile, the attic was pitch dark with no lights on inside of it at all. When I made it to the point where my head was now in the attic, but my feet were still on the ladder, I heard something. I couldn't really see anything, but it was definitely the sound of somebody walking in the attic closer to me. It really freaked me out. In an instant, and out of pure reaction, I zipped back down the ladder. Then, without stopping or anything, I ran to the front door and left the house. I did not stop running until I had made it all the way back to my car. Then I went home. I felt so glad to be back and was grateful that I did not have anything bad happen to me. When I looked online, the listing was now gone. Looking back, there was just way too many red flags in that situation. For one, why would they want me to go up in a dark attic by myself to retrieve the TV? Also, in that neighborhood, why would somebody be giving a working nice TV away for free? And who was in the attic? I hope I'm wrong and that was just some crazy, bizarre, random coincidence, but I don't think I am. So this happened years back when I was younger. I've done a little bit of acting over the years. It's not my only job, but I've appeared in several commercials and have done a little modeling and stuff. At one point, around the time of this story, I hadn't had that much experience yet. I had been struggling to find jobs and was looking everywhere. I needed cash and was looking at gigs and jobs on Craigslist. I came across one that seemed promising. It was an ad for a model needed to help promote a product for a business. It seemed right up my alley, and I responded, saying that I was interested in the job. The next day, I received a response from a man named Eric saying that he wanted to meet me for a job interview. I didn't know that there was going to be an interview, but I agreed to it. He gave me an address for the interview. I thought that it would maybe be the company that was doing the ad or something, but when I arrived, it looked like an apartment complex. Then I was supposed to go up to Eric's apartment. This seemed a little sketchy. I did it anyways, though. When I met with Eric, he just seemed weird and kind of gave me a bad feeling. He was not really that great at talking, and the whole thing was just really awkward. He asked me some of my background information and my experience. Then he asked me where I lived and where I went to school and stuff. After basic talk for maybe 5 minutes, he asked if I wanted the job. At that point, I just had a bad feeling. I told him no thanks, I would decline it, and then I left. He was just like, okay, bye. Now, after that day, I didn't think much else of it. I ended up getting a different part-time job the next week. Then, like maybe a month after the meeting with Eric, I saw this news story online on my phone. I saw a picture of the same guy Eric who I had interviewed with. The news story said that he had been arrested for stalking a woman in the area. I read the story and pretty much he had lied to her about having a modeling and acting agency. Then he kept stalking her and started threatening her as well. I was shocked and at the same time not that surprised. I'm really glad that he was caught, and I realized how close I came to him possibly stalking me as well. When I was 13 and in middle school, my class went to this one wildlife place. It was the first field trip of the year, so it was still very warm outside and there was pretty nice weather. We boarded the bus from school and it took us to this park that had lots of trails. There was also a lot of different types of plants and flowers, which is part of what we were there for. They also had a building and some tour guides who talked to us for a while. I don't remember a ton of details because it was a really long time ago, but I do know that at one point we went outside towards some of the trails. The tour guide was speaking, but taking forever to move from one place to another. We were sort of allowed to walk around and go on our own, but we were supposed to stay in the general area. There were a ton of kids though, so I remember that my friend Austin and I kind of wandered off together. Austin and I were pretty good friends, and we would talk all the time during class. I remember that we went down this trail and it kind of went around the corner. Austin and I just sort of kept walking and we were talking to each other. Before we knew it, we were a long ways from the rest of the class and we were pretty deep into the woods. I didn't really think much of it though, and we just continued to walk down the trail. Eventually, the trail got more and more narrow and the woods became more dense. When we got to that part, both of us heard a noise and some movement coming from deeper in the woods off the trail. We couldn't see where it was coming from exactly, but we decided to go closer, being the curious kids that we were. I think that we were both thinking and expecting it to maybe be some kind of an animal. I know I was. However, after we went off the trail and made it through the trees, we reached a small clearing. Inside that clearing there were these two guys standing by a tree and smoking. I'm not sure what exactly they were smoking, but the guys looked to maybe be in their late teens or so. Austin and I figured that they went into the woods to do drugs and so they wouldn't be seen, so we quickly turned around. The guys did not say anything, and we kept going down the path farther away from our class. We probably should have just gone back right then and there, and I'm not really sure why we didn't, but nevertheless, we continued to go down the path for some time. We talked, and basically we were just bored and wandering around. After like 10 minutes, we reached what was pretty much a dead end. The path made it to this marshland, and there was no bridge or anything. We walked along the edge of it for a while. As we were doing that, we started to hear footsteps behind us on the path. However, they were around a corner in a location that we could not see. They were also pretty far back. The footsteps sort of stopped though. Then, moments later, a rock flew towards us from around the corner. I didn't see at first where it had come from exactly, but a few moments later, I saw somebody come around the corner for just a second and throw another rock. That one went flying towards us and just barely missed. It looked like the guys we had seen who had been smoking. They were now throwing rocks at us. Moments later, the other guy came out and tossed a rock. This throw was much better and got even closer. Austin and I didn't want to wait around any longer. We turned and started running along the marshland. Then we turned and cut through the thick woods, not even going on the path. We knew the basic way to get back to the main area, so we were trying to get there by any means. After running for a while, we soon heard footsteps a ways behind us. I figured that the two guys were chasing us. They were a long ways back, but it made us go even faster. We kept running until we stopped hearing the footsteps. Eventually, we found a path again. Then we continued to lightly jog until we had made it back to the class. They had only moved like 30 feet, and one of the guides was still speaking. I don't think anybody even knew that we had left. I'm not sure who those guys were that we saw, but they seemed to have bad intentions. Maybe they were mad that we saw them doing drugs, or maybe they thought it was just a joke. Either way, I'm glad that we got away from them. One time back when I was in high school, one of my classes went on a field trip to a history museum. It was a history class and there were about 30 kids in it. One of those kids in particular was a guy who I really didn't like at all, and he didn't like me either. For this story, I'm just going to call him John. So John was always kind of a jerk. He was a bully and a troublemaker. When he was in class, he would always sit in the back and usually sleep for the whole hour, or secretly vape by sticking his head in his shirt. During my freshman year, I had to be his partner on a class project, and he was rude to me and unfair the whole time. That's kind of what led to us being sort of enemies, and for some reason, we always seemed to have classes together. In this history class, I would just try to avoid him. I know that he had gotten suspended at one point for actually punching another kid in the school. I didn't think that it was worth my time to fight him though. I was a member of the high school baseball team and I didn't want to get in trouble. John wasn't involved in any activities, so he had nothing to lose, I guess. Anyways, we went on this field trip to the history museum. There were lots of exhibits and things to look at. It was pretty much what you would expect from a history museum, and at one point we were free to roam around the museum how we wanted to. So I remember that there was this one exhibit in particular of like an old town. There was a glass wall with railing a little more than waist high. I was looking at the town and sort of leaning over to see better because it was a very cool exhibit. It was kind of like those train cities that people build, but this was of an old-fashioned town, so there was a lot of things to look at. I remember that in the middle of this, all of a sudden, I felt someone sort of grab me from behind and push me over. As I was falling, I saw that it was John who had pushed me. I fell over the railing and right next to the city. By extreme luck, I didn't break anything. I had mostly landed next to the city. However, I knocked over a few of the buildings and stuff on the edge of it, but mostly things were fine. When I looked up, John was far off, like 15 feet away now, and sort of laughing. As I started to get up, I saw that everyone in the room was now looking at me. It was very embarrassing. The lady who worked at the museum got mad and started to yell at me. I started to pick up the things that fell over and was told to stop and not touch anything. She told me to get out of there, so I did. The lady seemed to not see that I had been pushed, and it appeared as though she had the impression that I had just jumped in to be funny or something. She scolded me, and I told her that I had been pushed, but for some reason she didn't seem to believe me. I looked over to John and said that he had pushed me over. By now, John was on the complete other side of the room, and he was walking away even farther. I was so mad, and I went over to find John, but by that point he had left the room. I found another kid who I knew, and I told him how John had pushed me over. The kid said that he didn't see it, but at least he seemed to actually believe me. Apparently, nobody else in the room had seen me get pushed and didn't really know what had happened. As the day went on at the History Museum, I didn't see John for almost the entire rest of the time. I was kind of glad that I didn't see him, but I also wanted to give him a piece of my mind. So finally, when the field trip was over and we were about to leave, I saw John again. By that time, I had cooled down, and I decided to just ignore him and not confront him or anything. So we all boarded the bus back and went back to school. When we arrived back, it was just in time for our final classes of the day. I remember that I got to my class, which was some type of a science class, I think. I sat next to one of my good friends, and when I got there, he asked me about the field trip. Then he showed me this Snapchat story that he had seen. It was a story that John had posted on his Snapchat. I hadn't seen it because I wasn't friends with John on Snapchat. Anyways, the post was of him sitting in the back of the bus, taking a selfie holding this old hat that he had stolen from the museum. The hat was in one of the exhibits, I remember, because one of the tour guides told a story about how it's really old and authentic. I couldn't believe that John had stolen it, but it also didn't surprise me knowing him. I talked with my friend about how John had pushed me into the exhibit and stuff. The next day at history class, our teacher had found out that somebody had stole the hat, but he didn't know who. Apparently nobody else knew who did it either, besides me. When class started, our teacher told us how the museum told him somebody stole the hat, and they didn't know who. Our teacher then said that somebody had to step up and confess, but everyone was silent. Of course, I wasn't going to rat out John in front of everyone. I was planning to after class, though. After the teacher's speech, we resumed, and unfortunately, in the long class period, I forgot about telling the teacher how John had stolen it. I just moved on with my day and went to my next class. I'm not sure how many people had John on Snapchat, if anybody in the class even did at all. So I remember that later on in the school day, I was at my locker putting my books away. Some other kid who I barely knew started calling my name. He was like halfway down the hall, and I knew who he was, but we were not friends. I had no idea why he was calling me, so I walked over to him. When I got there, he brought up how I had taken a spill at the museum, and he started laughing about it. I told him that John had pushed me, and he just thought it was so funny. So at that point, I just walked back over to my locker. After the next class, I went to my locker again, but when I got my other book, I saw the hat. That same stolen hat had been hidden behind my large science book in my locker. I realized then that John must have planted it there. It must have been when the other kid called me over. They probably were in on it together. Now John was trying to plant stolen goods on me. I didn't want to get in trouble or anything, and I was really angry, so I took the hat and went straight to my history teacher's classroom. When I got there, I told him the whole story. I was afraid that he wouldn't believe me, but thankfully he did. He knew that I was a pretty good student, and he knew that John wasn't. He also reported that one of the students had reported to him that she had seen John's Snapchat story. I gave the hat to him, and he returned it to the museum. I remember that John ended up getting suspended for a week for that. After that school year, John dropped out of our school. I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with him anymore. For some background, I'm a female, and this took place when I was in college. When I was a freshman, I remember that for one of my classes we went on a field trip at night. We were going to be looking at the stars, and we're going at 9 p.m. I guess there was this spot a few miles from campus where you could get a really good view of the sky. It was a park, and the entire field trip was completely for extra credit, because obviously the professor didn't expect everybody to be able to make it that late. There were quite a few students in the class, and I cared a lot about my grades, so I decided to go. We met in this one parking lot on campus at about 8:45 p.m. The turnout was a lot more than I expected. There were probably about 25 of us students there, along with the professor. We boarded the bus, and it took us down to the park that was maybe 10 minutes away. Then we got off, and there was this park surrounded by several wooded areas. There was a large open field in the middle, though, and that's where the professor told us to meet. After he talked to us for a few minutes, we all started looking at the stars. We were free to walk around a little, but we also had worksheets to fill out. I started to walk around and do the assignment. About 10 minutes into it, and I was kind of on the edge near the trees. I remember hearing what sounded like a noise coming from just inside the woods. I looked over, and there was this guy creeping along the edge of the wood line. The man was not in our class. I knew that for a fact, and he was just kind of walking just inside the woods and looking at us. I just looked back and away from him and tried to continue. I thought it was kind of strange, but didn't really know what to make of it. A while later, though, I remember looking back to the woods again. The man was just standing there, just barely inside the woods, and facing me. He appeared to be looking right at me, and it was a little bit weird, so I moved away. I went closer to some other people and continued with the assignment. Things went on, but maybe 15 minutes or so after that, I saw the guy yet again. He was kind of standing just inside the grass, no longer in the woods. Once more, he appeared to be looking at me, which sort of creeped me out a little. However, I really wasn't that scared or anything, because I was with all these other people that were in my class. After a while longer, we were done for the day with the field trip. The professor gathered everybody around and then said that we were leaving. So we all walked back to the front of the park and to the parking lot. Then we boarded the bus. Except, as I was in line to get on the bus, I saw up ahead the man from the park who had been in the woods. He was like the second or third person on the bus, and I was wondering why he was getting on. I had been completely sure that he wasn't in the class. I started to second guess myself, thinking maybe the man was in our class, or maybe he did belong there. Perhaps he was in another class with the professor, or maybe he was with the group in some way. Nobody seemed to say anything to him though, and why was he in the woods and staring at me so weird? I went and sat down on a seat pretty close to the front. I looked back, and it appeared as though the man had got on a seat in the complete back row. We took the ride back, and when we got to campus, we all got off the bus. Then all the students started to disperse. I was a freshman, so I lived in one of the freshman dorms and had walked there. It was about halfway across campus on the other side, so I began to walk back. By now, it was like 10 p.m., and there really weren't any other people out. A couple of other students from class walked near me for a while, but they went to one of the other dorm buildings. Then it was just me on the sidewalk walking back. However, I remember that I heard somebody behind me. I assumed it to be somebody else from the class. However, I felt the need to look over my shoulder, and I did. There, I saw the same man who had been in the woods and stuff. He was walking sort of far behind me by himself. I had never seen him on campus before, and the man did not look college age. He looked older. Obviously, people of all ages go to college, but this guy just didn't seem like a student. He had no backpack or anything, and I hadn't seen him with the worksheet we had for class. I was like 90% sure that he had just come out of the woods and hopped on our bus. How nobody seemed to notice him was beyond me. As I walked, he remained behind me, and I started to get nervous. I began walking faster. The man seemed to speed up as well. I knew that I just needed to get to my dorm building, because if he didn't live there, he wouldn't be able to enter. You needed a key fob to get in. I walked faster, going about as quick as I could without running. I could see my building, and it was just a ways up. During this time, the man stayed about 50 feet behind me or so. Finally, I reached my building. I quickly used my key to get in and made sure that the door shut behind me. Then I went through the lobby and to the stairs to go up quickly. My room was on the 3rd floor, and it had a window looking out. I quickly went to my dorm room and then over to the window. I looked out and saw the man standing by the doors and trying to enter. I watched him start to loudly bang on the front door to the dorm building, which was not opening for him. He eventually stopped, but continued to stand around by the doors for a while. I think he was hoping that somebody else would leave and he could sneak in. Thankfully, nobody did. I looked over again about 10 minutes later, and he was still there, sitting on a bench. Finally, after a while, I looked, and he was gone. I'm pretty sure that that man was up to no good, and I'm really glad that he didn't get in my dorm. This story happened many years ago when I was in high school. I lived near Detroit, Michigan, and one day for my art class we had a field trip. We went to the Cranbrook Art Museum, which is a good destination for field trips around here. The art museum is really nice, and it's a cool area from what I remember. That was the only time that I went there, but when we arrived there was a school and a museum and some other buildings. Around them was some other stuff, and it seemed like a campus almost. There were these winding roads with woods beside them, and a few walking trails as well. So, for my art class, we were going with a group of about 20 kids. We got to Cranbrook, and after getting off the bus, we went inside of the museum. It was an all-day field trip, so we were inside for a while. I remember that we got a break kind of towards the end, and we were allowed to go outside a little. I didn't have any really good friends in the class, so I went outside sort of by myself. I was just looking around at what was nearby, and I walked on a path a little ways. I was curious to see where it would go, so I crossed this street, and then the path sort of entered the woods. Nobody else was over there, and it seemed very quiet. I was planning to walk for maybe 5 minutes and then head back. Pretty much, I was just wandering around. However, as I walked through the woods, I heard this sound coming from off the path somewhere. It was a man's voice calling for help. It was weird because it was like he could hear me approaching, but he was off the path and in the woods. I couldn't see him from where I was, but when I came around the corner, I saw this guy emerging from the trees. When I saw him, he said that he needed help. The guy did not appear to work at the museum or be a teacher or anything, and he was much too old to be a student. He was just wearing a camouflage jacket and jeans. He told me to follow him, and he started to go into the woods. I didn't want to, though, and I asked why. He stopped and seemed annoyed, and he told me to just follow him. He then added that he had hurt his foot. I was confused. What did him hurting his foot have to do with me going into the woods? He told me to follow him again, and I walked a little bit closer. Then, suddenly, the man turned around and started to sprint towards me. My only reaction was to run away. I turned and started sprinting down the path back towards the street to get out of the woods. It wasn't that long of a ways, thankfully, and I was able to make it out. When I did, I heard the man laughing behind me. He did not leave the wooded area of the path, though. After that, I went back inside the building with the rest of my class, and stayed with them for the rest of the field trip. I didn't see the guy again, and I've always wondered who he was. Was he trying to be funny, or could it have been a possible abduction or robbery attempt or something like that? It gives me the creeps to think back on it. This happened a really long time ago. I was in high school, and for some class we took a field trip to go hiking. I really don't remember what class that would have been, or why we took a field trip to go hiking. Maybe some gym class? I really don't know. I just know that I remember the actual field trip really well. In fact, it's probably something that I will never forget. So we went to this park that had a bunch of trails. Some parts passed by flat ground, and other parts went through some wooded areas. There were also ponds and some rocky terrain that the trails went through. I'm pretty sure that there were like 10 miles of trails in that park. So when we got there, my class started out together. People ended up splitting up though. I have no idea how the teacher was planning to find everyone and not lose a student in the massive park, but I know that I was kind of hiking on my own. I started out with a few kids in class that I was kind of friends with. However, at one point, for some reason, I stopped. I don't remember why, but they went one way and I went another. So I started hiking by myself, and I do remember that our teacher gave us these step counters. They were the kind that you just shake them and it counts your steps, and you clip them to your pants or something. So we were going to see at the end who got the most steps. That might have been why I went by myself. Anyways, I walked for a while and I passed by this one interesting spot. There was a little pond to my right and lots of trees around, but not really a woods. As I was walking past, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man sitting up in a tree. It was a really weird sight. It shocked me and I almost jumped back when I saw him. The guy was wearing a hat and sunglasses and looking around. I thought maybe he was bird watching or something and just really into it, so he went up in a tree. And he was honestly pretty hard to see at first. I mean, I'd been walking there for at least 15 seconds before I noticed him. But once you saw him, you saw him. I had to walk under the tree on the path to get past him. So after I did so, I continued. However, moments later, I heard movement in the tree and then heard the man getting down. He literally jumped out from way up in the tree. I glanced behind me and saw the man start to walk after me. That kind of made me nervous. This guy was already seeming a little strange. Why did he suddenly leave the tree after I had passed? I kept walking though, trying to ignore him. However, I soon heard his footsteps, like he was walking behind me. I saw the path turning up ahead, and then there was a spot where you could go left or right. Left was leading back more towards my class, so I took that way. I was really hoping that the man wouldn't do the same, but he did. After that is when I started jogging. This way I would get more steps anyways, so I went faster, and to my horror, it sounded like the guy behind me started jogging as well. I was not expecting that, but it forced me to go even faster. By now, I was running. I went down that path, turned again, and continued running. The good news is at least the man was not gaining on me. Eventually, I stopped hearing him altogether. He must have either not been that fast or in good shape, or just didn't really feel like chasing me that much. Either way, it was a huge relief. I kept going though, and I didn't feel completely safe until I saw other students. Then I was able to hang around them, and I did not want to walk by myself anymore. We walked around for a while longer. Maybe like 30 minutes to an hour later, I randomly saw the guy again. He was now off the trail, almost hiding behind a tree. I don't know how I saw him again, because other people didn't seem to notice. I ignored him though and kept walking. I made sure to stick by other students for the rest of the day. Eventually, we were done with the hiking and we had to meet back up towards the front of the park. Then we left and went back to school. I still think about that sometimes. Why did the guy follow me like that, and why was he even there in a tree? It was very strange. I remember that in 5th grade, my class went on a field trip to this nature park. I don't recall exactly which park it was, but it was probably like 20 minutes from my school. There was a walking path, but it wasn't really that long, and the park was not for hiking. It was more for looking at the waterfall and river that was there. There were different levels of elevation and a lot of overlook places and stuff. So when we got there, I remember that we went to the building and somebody talked to us for a while. It was just my class of roughly about 30 kids and our teacher. We then walked around to the different places on some of the trails. Then after that, we had some time to walk around on our own and look at some spots. There was a kid that I was sort of friends with that I was kind of hanging out with. Well, while we were there wasn't really anybody else in the park other than our class. I did notice a few random people here and there, but not many. So after walking around and stuff and being there for probably an hour, I remember that I went off with my friend. We were just going to different places to see the views. I think we would be leaving to go back to the school in about 30 minutes or so. It was then when we were walking around that I saw this other kid around our age. However, he was not in our class. The kid kind of walked near my friend and I, but didn't say anything. I didn't really know anything about him, but I assumed that he was maybe there with his parents or something. My friend and I eventually walked off, and I remembered that the kid sort of followed us. He didn't walk real close, but he sort of trailed us a ways back. We walked around for a good 20 minutes, and every place that we went, the kid seemed to be a little ways behind us. It was kind of odd. We mostly just ignored him though. Eventually, it was time for us to meet back up with the rest of the class. So we went back over, and the teacher took attendance near the bus in the parking lot. Then we all started to get on the bus. It was at this time when I noticed the kid again. He was walking over from the other end of the parking lot. To my surprise, the kid walked right up behind me. I was one of the last kids to get in line on the bus, and my teacher, I think, was talking to another student a ways away. The kid blended right in and got on the bus with me. I was very confused, and I was really close to turning around and asking him who he was, but I didn't. So this kid then got onto the bus and proceeded to sit in the farthest seat in the back. I was shocked, and I'm 100% certain that he was not in my class. He didn't talk to anyone, and just got into his seat on the bus and didn't say anything. I went to a different seat, and we then went back to the school. After arriving back, everybody got off the bus. I purposely looked around to try to find the kid after getting off. When I did, I saw him exit the bus and then walk behind it away from the class. The rest of us had to go inside the school, and once in, the teacher took attendance again. The kid was obviously gone, and I was still trying to figure out why he rode on our bus. I went on with the school day and continued with my classes. Then after school, I got out and I left. This was probably just like an hour after we got back from the field trip. During this time, I would ride another bus home. When I left the school to catch my bus, I saw the kid again. He was standing around by a tree outside the school, but it looked like he was hiding behind it. I honestly don't know what he was doing. We left after that. I never saw him again. To this day, that still puzzles me.
My name is Ethan, and I was 15 in the summer of 2021. I was one of the older kids who attended Camp Lennox in Beckett, Massachusetts. My parents sent me there to get away from the noise of Boston for a while and roast marshmallows in the New England wilderness. Minus the lockdowns from the year before, I had been coming here since 2018, and since I was the oldest attendee that summer, I became a de facto trustee. However, that summer, things will play out a little differently. Something that I would like to make clear is that this story is 100% true and can be verified by a simple Google search. Also, please forgive me if I get a bit carried away with trips down memory lane. After what happened, I have never returned to that place. And being 4 years removed, I can look back and say that I really enjoyed being there. And it's unfortunate that things ended the way they did. But like my father always says, life isn't a fairy tale with happy endings. I remember that it was the night we were doing rope burn, a big tradition at Camp Lennox. The ritual was simple. We had to build a fire high enough to burn through a rope strung between two poles. The team with the fastest blaze won bragging rights and a pizza. I was on the blue team, and our counselor, Jake, was hyping us up. "Let's be legendary tonight," he always used to say. I was teamed up with 2 other campers, Sam and Riley. We set off to gather firewood from the edge of the forest behind the camp. Nothing unusual. We had done this 100 times before on nights when we were just building fires for roasting marshmallows. So we trudged through the trees with our flashlights, looking for dry sticks. For those of you who spend a lot of time outdoors and may have experienced a thing or two in the woods, know that the forest has a way of telling you that something is off. A strange stillness came over the forest. It was very noticeable to me. We were maybe 50 yards in, kicking through the underbrush, when Riley stopped in his tracks and looked back at us. "Ugh, do you guys smell that?" he asked. He was ahead of us, so it wasn't long before I caught a whiff. It was the unmistakable stench of decomposition. Jake, holding his nose, said, "Oh, probably just a dead animal." It was the logical conclusion to come to, so we kept moving. But the knot in my stomach tightened as we moved further in. I just somehow knew that we were going to discover something seriously messed up out here. Soon, my flashlight caught something. There was a figure slumped against a tree, half hidden by ferns from my vantage point. I froze once I realized it was a human. The others didn't seem to notice. "Guys," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My comrades swung their lights over to where mine was, and that's when we saw the full picture. It was the body of a man, curled up at the base of an oak, his clothes dirty and torn. His skin was grayish, bloated, and melting away. The smell hit us like a tsunami, and Riley gagged, stumbling back. Sam just stared, his flashlight shaking in his hand. Jake cursed under his breath and stepped in front of us, like he could shield us from what we had already seen. "Stay back," Jake said, his voice sharp now. "Don't touch anything." He fumbled for his walkie-talkie and radioed the head counselor. "Come in. This is Jake. We found a body in the woods. Send help, now. You boys head back to camp, and don't say anything about this to the others. We don't want everyone to panic." I led Riley and Sam back to the main camp. We sat at a table in the mess hall, whispering to each other. "Was that real? Was that fucking real?" Sam asked. Riley just stared at his hands, like he had a newfound appreciation for not being a melting corpse. I don't think it truly sank in for me until we got back to camp, that we had discovered a dead body in the forest. My mind kept replaying the way the man's head was tilted, like a zombie taking a nap against a tree. The police eventually came and cordoned off the area. The rope burn was obviously canceled that night, and the staff did their best to keep things normal the following day. We played capture the flag and had s'mores by the lake, but it wasn't the same. Sam had broken the silence, and the rest of the campers were whispering in their bunks at night, making up stories about how there was a serial killer in the forest. I didn't join in because I had my own problems to deal with, like how every time I closed my eyes, I would see that body against the tree. Jake checked on us the following night. His usual goofy demeanor was gone. "You guys okay?" he asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. I don't think any of us were. We'd seen something that we weren't supposed to. Something that didn't fit in with the usual upbeat environment of Camp Linux. We didn't talk much about it after that, not even with each other. When my parents eventually picked me up, I did my best to assure them that I was fine. But looking back, I think I was just depressed, because I would never view Camp Linux in the same light ever again. This place was once a childhood sanctuary in my mind, and was now tainted by the stench of a rotting corpse. The identity of the man in the woods was never publicly disclosed, but the police believe that it was a 35-year-old man who died by suicide. I was 13 in the summer of 1999, living in Oklahoma City. One night, I was at a sleepover at my friend Lila's house. It was our end of summer sleepover, a tradition we had kept since second grade, except this time we were joined by a girl named Emma. Emma's parents were good friends with Lila's parents, and this was my first time meeting her, but we got along fine. Soon, the time came to tell scary stories in our little makeshift tent we had set up in the living room. We made it a game, passing around a flashlight and placing it under our chins while we told our stories. Lila and I recycled the last year's tales, only tweaking certain details from the year before, which we teased each other about. When Emma's turn came, she sat up and asked if it was okay to turn off the flashlight while telling her story. We agreed.
My aunt came over one day and told this story to my mom in our living room. They didn't know I was playing in the upstairs hallway and could hear every word.
Lila and I were instantly intrigued, huddling closer together.
A long time ago, my aunt was a camp counselor for the Girl Scouts. One morning after an outdoor camping trip, she was walking to the showers when she saw a sleeping bag lying on the trail. It was out of place, and she thought that maybe some of the girls were playing a prank. But when she got closer, she saw a young girl inside the sleeping bag. Her face was pale, her eyes open, staring at nothing. As soon as she saw her, my aunt knew that the girl was dead. That's when she saw 2 more sleeping bags nearby, crumpled up like trash. She ran to the nearest one and unzipped it, only to find another girl, curled up and not moving. The third one was the same. 3 little girls found dead in the forest.
My breath caught. Lila's smirk was gone, her eyes wide. Were they murdered? She asked. Emma nodded.
Strangled, bruised up, like they had been beaten. There was a red flashlight on one of the bodies with tape over the lens. Inside their tent was a bloody shoe print and a smeared handprint that was too big to be the girls.
I was legitimately terrified. I pulled my blanket up and squeezed closer to Lila. Your aunt really saw all that? I asked, half hoping Emma would laugh and say the whole thing was made up, but she just shrugged.
She told my mom she still dreams about those girls, seeing their dead faces staring up at her. The camp closed after that, and you want to know something else? They never caught the guy. Some say he's still out there, lurking somewhere in those woods.
Lila tried to laugh it off, but I could tell she was freaked out as well. The stories we told were nowhere close to this level of fucked up. We eventually moved on to talking about boys and music. But Emma's story haunted me. It was so graphic, so detailed for a preteen girl to just make up. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak in Lila's house, imagining someone was lurking outside. 7 years later, in 2006, I was a college freshman back home for Thanksgiving. Lila and I hadn't seen each other since we graduated high school, so I drove over to her house the day before Thanksgiving. After some small talk and catching up, she dropped a bomb on me. Do you remember that really messed up story Emma told us during that sleepover? Truth be told, I had been thinking about that story ever since I got back into town. Yeah, why? You're not gonna believe this, but it wasn't a made-up story. It actually happened. What? That story always bothered me because it seemed so real. I did some research in my spare time at my school's library. In 1977, 3 Girl Scouts were found dead in their sleeping bags at Camp Scott. Their names were Lori Farmer, Michelle Guzet, and Denise Milner. The counselor who discovered them was Carla Wilhite, Emma's aunt. My stomach dropped. For years, we thought Emma was just a good storyteller trying to impress us that night, but she had been telling the truth. Her aunt was the one who discovered the bodies of those 3 girls in 1977. At the time, there was an escaped convict named Jean Leroy Hart who was suspected to be the one who committed the murders. He was arrested and faced a criminal trial back in the 70s, but was acquitted by a jury due to lack of evidence. It wouldn't be until 2022 that DNA testing revealed that he was likely the perpetrator, but by then, he had been dead for over 40 years. I was thinking of a good way to end this story, and considering that even the DNA testing was never able to definitively prove that Hart was the monster in the woods that night, and the very real possibility that someone else may have been involved, I can think of no better way to end things than by quoting Emma's own words.
They never caught the guy. Some say he's still out there, lurking somewhere in those woods.
It has been 31 years total since I've worked as a counselor at Camp Valleyway. I've spent 20 of those years trying to forget about what I saw and lying to myself and to others about what I know happened. It came to a point where I succeeded in fooling myself and pushed the experience to a hidden place in my mind. But 20 years after that fateful day on the lake, I would discover the truth. I started working when I was 15, and I spent my summers at Camp Valleyway. The camp was nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians, between 2 mountains with a natural lake in the center, its water stained with a murky southern clay. I worked as a swim instructor and lifeguard. Each week, a new set of campers traveled from across the state to experience the outdoors. I still remember the exact day it happened. It was a Tuesday, the 5th week of camp, the hottest day of that summer, and just before the 4th of July. That week was known as Rich Week to the counselors, since many of the wealthier parents left their children here while they took off for holiday. This would come right after Orphan Week, which was when the Clarkstown Orphanage, the largest in the state, traveled to camp free of charge because the camp was government funded. Every year, the local residents would come by at the end of the week, and children were often adopted. I remember that a girl in my class found a new home with some local farmers, and I remember seeing Ellie wave from the cab of the pickup truck she was riding in as she started her new life with her foster family. In my off time, I would help the other counselors patch up sails under the water sports canopy. Logan, the head counselor, who was about 5 years older than me, was sitting at one of the picnic tables, his small eyes scanning the lake. He kept his hair in a tight buzz cut, revealing a scar around the back of his head, and when he spoke, it was a deep southern drawl.
"Mike, watch what you're doing."
He saw that I had skipped a stitch in the sail.
"I only got 2 eyes, and there's too much going on for me to watch everyone today."
"Got it," I said, and put my head down. Logan kept a tight watch on his crew, but now his focus was on the lake. Ed and Ted, twin counselors with one brain between them, were teaching a beginner swimming course off the shore. Those two always made Logan uneasy, and earned a spot on his mental list of instructors who were likely to screw up next. So when Ed, the smarter of the two, came sprinting up from the lakeside, Logan was ready. Ed opened his mouth, words wheezing in between each breath, with his wet hair plastered over one of his eyes. "We're missing one. One camper. Can't find him in the water. Friends don't know where he is." Without hesitation, Logan's whistle shrieked through the campground, startling campers and counselors alike.
"Everyone out of the water, now! All lifeguards report to the dock."
His deep voice caused adrenaline to rush through me, as we ran to the water. I was the first to dive in, followed by the other lifeguards. I was in the deeper end of the designated swimming area of the lake, which only went down to around 14 feet, but you could barely see anything. The bottom was a cold and dark abyss. Underwater plants gripped against my calves as I searched the depths. Eventually, I had to return to the surface, and Logan sent us back down again to search after we caught our breath. During my second descent, I was searching by a patch of water weeds when a pale hand brushed against my face. I saw the face next. It was dark, but I could tell that it was a girl with long hair that fanned around her, like she was under static electricity. I gasped, drawing in water. I gripped her torso and began swimming to the surface. She felt swollen, her arms too big, and her temperature was hypothermic. Halfway to the surface, I felt her leg catch on something, and she was pulled back down out of my grip. I turned, watching her open eyes on mine as she descended back into the darkness. My lungs were screaming for air. I had to resurface for oxygen. "I found her! I found her! Come quick!" I shouted, before I dove back down, my hands sweeping through the muddy bottom, but I found nothing but muck, even as the other lifeguards joined. 5 minutes later, Logan's whistle rang out again, calling us back to the dock.
Listen up. The missing camper has been found in the restroom. Ed and Ted must have let him slip past. Both of them will be spending tonight scrubbing the dock.
He paused, and I felt the other lifeguard's gaze fall on me.
You're all free to go, except for you, Mike. I want a word.
The others trudged away, looking back at us over their shoulders. Logan focused on me.
I don't know what the hell that was about, but you could have got someone killed. The next time you try something like this, you're out of here.
But there was someone down there.
I don't believe in ghosts, Mike, and we scoured that water. Now get out of my sight. You're off waterfront.
Word spread around camp about what happened. I could tell many of them detested me, and none believed my side of the story. So I quit the next week and pushed the incident to the back of my mind, though it would resurface in my dreams. That happened in late June of 1994. 20 years later, which was 11 years ago from now, I read a news article that was titled, "Human Remains Found at Camp Valleyway." Due to reservations, the lake was drained, revealing a collection of bones at the deepest region. Several femurs were found attached to anchors with rope. It is estimated that the remains belonged to 19 victims between the ages of 10 and 13 years old. After much investigation, the state police discovered the source of the bodies. 10 years prior to this discovery, the Clarkstown orphanage was shut down for embezzling state funds. Each summer, the children spent a week at the camp and would be adopted by local families. However, after reviewing the records, it was discovered that these adoptions were never official, and they were disposed of in the lake at an area that was too deep for the campers to normally enter, except for one that drifted near the swimming area due to a corroded rope. It is believed that the orphanage appropriated these children long after their death to extort more money from the state. A lot of the people involved in this conspiracy have been incarcerated, but they didn't get everyone. And there are still many unanswered questions.
I've been an avid fisherman for over 6 years now and have worked at several different companies as a commercial fisherman, catching snapper, dolphin, whatever is biting and paying, I guess. I was 26 when this happened. I attended grad school in marine biology and had been granted a week off for our spring break. Many graduate programs don't typically offer spring break for students, but I guess I was lucky. During my trip, a buddy and I decided to take a fishing trip off the coast of Hawaii to find the many different species of fish, primarily the ones that were native to the Pacific. We had rented this fishing boat for a few days so we could have a better chance of getting a decent catch. One night during our stay, my friend and I decided to take the boat out at around 1 a.m. to catch a specific type of fish in the area. This fish was semi-nocturnal, and this was the ideal time to catch one. So, him and I are offshore on an average boat with nothing around us but pitch blackness. It's a lot more scary than you think. You had to be there to believe me. One of us is on one side of the boat, while the other is on the opposite, not making a peep, trying to catch this fish. About maybe 20 or so minutes later, we both hear what sounded like humming coming from somewhere around our boat. I asked my friend if he had heard that too, to which he said yes. The humming sounded like it was coming from a person, specifically a woman. I motioned for my friend to turn on the deck light, and to our shock, we found nothing in the water. It made absolutely no sense, as the humming was coming from literally right next to our boat. Seriously, it made me almost piss myself. Every time we heard it from one direction, it would always change to the other direction when we went there. After some time of searching around the boat, the humming stops and my friend yells at me to get over here. I run to the back of the boat, and what I see in the water made my blood run cold. There was a woman who looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s just floating on her back in the water. She did not appear to be alive. However, the odd thing about her was what she was wearing. She wore this dark blue dress that was way too small for her. She wasn't wearing any shoes, but she had on a necklace and a single ring. We both stare at each other in disbelief, thinking if we had just witnessed the aftermath of a murder. My friend and I go inside the boat, attempting to radio the Coast Guard or anyone from shore. We were unable to reach someone, and after a few more attempts, we went back to go check on her, only to find her gone. It had only been 3 minutes since we last saw her, and even after shining the light in the water, she was nowhere in sight. At that point, we decided to end it there, as we were both absolutely creeped the hell out. Back on land, we agreed to not speak a word about what we had seen. Had we told someone, we'd probably be suspected of bringing her on board with us and dumping her body in the ocean. Obviously, we didn't do that, but people aren't going to believe that we just found her. A few days later, my friend had looked up missing people in Hawaii, specifically Maui. After looking through hundreds of people, we never found the woman we saw, and she has yet to be identified. The thing that creeped us out the most was that we were several miles offshore and found this woman in a long dress. It's like putting a puzzle piece where it doesn't fit. It made no sense. If you live in the Maui area, I emphasize you please contact police if you have any information. This encounter keeps me up at night.